on. And the nurse accused of murdering multiple babies at the Countess of Chester Hospital has told a jury today she had not harmed any children. We'll be outside Manchester Crown Court for the latest live from the Lucy Letby trial. And as he steps down from his key position at Google, the godfather of artificial intelligence warns the technology may not be too clever for us all in the long run. Should we shut up shop on the chatbots? First, though, the latest headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thanks very much. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom at 12:01. A nurse accused of murdering 7 babies and attempting to kill 10 others is giving evidence for the first time today. 33-year-old Lucy Letby is on trial at Manchester Crown Court for the offences alleged to have taken place between June 2015 and June 2016. Letby from Hereford denies all the offences alleged to have taken place at the neonatal unit of the Countess of Chester Hospital. Unions and NHS employers are meeting today in the hope to resolve the long-running pay dispute between health workers and the government. Members of the Royal College of Nursing and Unite have rejected the government's offer of a 5% pay rise for this year and a cash sum for last year. But other unions, including Unison, the GMB and those representing midwives and physiotherapists, have voted in favour. Food inflation went up to another record high in April, but lower prices are on the horizon, according to the British Retail Consortium. Grocery prices rose by 15.7% last month, the biggest annual increase in records going back almost 2 decades. The figures also show that prices for non-food items slowed because of spring discounts on clothing and furniture. House prices showed signs of stabilising last month, according to mortgage lender Nationwide. The price of a home rose by 0.5% after falling for the past 7 months. Compared to April last year, the average house price was down 2.7%. Teachers across England are on strike today following ongoing pay disputes. In April, members of the National Education Union overwhelmingly rejected a pay offer. The NEU, along with 3 other teaching unions, has rejected an offer which included a £1,000 one-off payment and a 4.3% pay rise for most staff in September. Today's walkout is the 5th undertaken by educators this year, causing major problems. But NEU representative Daniel Hearn says that teacher retention and resources are already causing disruptions in the classroom.
I really want to cause disruption to students. The thing is, disruption is already being caused to students by things like retention, by things like lack of resources. So, if anything, this strike is to avoid further disruption. And ultimately, you can't say that you value education and then not value teachers.
Lawyers representing victims of the 2017 Grenfell Tower fire are beginning to outline details of a settlement of civil damages claims at the High Court in London. A barrister indicated there had been a global settlement of about 900 cases. A global sum of about £150 million in compensation had been agreed. Court listings indicated that a council, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, is one of a number of defendants in the litigation. Oil giant BP is reporting stronger than expected profits in the first 3 months of 2023, reaching close to £4 billion. The result was a reduction from the £4.96 billion that BP made in the same quarter last year, but well ahead of the £3.44 billion analysts had expected it to make. An update on the review into the departure of former senior civil servant Sue Gray to join the Labour Party will be presented to MPs today. A statement will be issued by the Cabinet Office, which will shed light on how Ms Gray came to switch from her high-ranking Whitehall position to take a job as the Labour leader's Chief of Staff. Ms Gray, who led a government investigation into allegations of parties being held in Downing Street during the coronavirus lockdown, could be found to have broken the Civil Service Code when she entered talks with the Labour Party. Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds has praised Sue Gray as one of the best people in government.
wasn't the original person investigating these Partygate scandal allegations. It was somebody else. He unfortunately had to resign because he'd been at the parties he was supposed to be investigating. So look, we're trying to pick the best people to help us build a team for government. We'll follow the official process, whatever it might be, to get those people.
The final flights evacuating British nationals from Sudan are due to land in Britain today. Sudanese doctors working for the NHS are among the passengers. According to government figures, almost 2,200 people have been evacuated. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says the British mission in Sudan isn't over despite the end of the evacuation airlift.
There is still an ongoing humanitarian situation. We still have a presence at Port Sudan, both a military presence and a number of other government officials to help British nationals and their dependents leave the country. So we have concluded the air operation, the air evacuation out of Wadi Sedna to the north of Khartoum. It was a complicated operation, but I think one that has proven to be very successful.
Councils in England have approved more than 3,000 road closures for street parties during the Coronation. The most popular day for the royal celebration is Sunday, when 62% of festivities will take place. The street parties will cover a total of 263 miles. Meanwhile, King Charles's coronation is expected to provide a £120 million boost to pubs across the UK. The British Beer and Pub Association says locals, pubs and breweries are planning to pour 62 million pints over the bank holiday weekend. Pubs will be allowed to stay open until 1 a.m. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. Now, with an extraordinary intervention in the lead-up to the coronation, Princess Anne has declared that a slimmed-down monarchy does not sound like a good idea. Well, the Princess Royal gave an interview to a Canadian broadcaster saying the idea was originally mooted when there were a few more people around.
Oh, I think the slim down was said in a day when there were a few more people around to make that seem like a justifiable comment.
The world changes a bit.
It changes a bit. I mean, it doesn't sound like a good idea from where I'm standing, I have to say.
I'm sure it does
I'm
not
not quite sure what else, we can do.
Well, those comments come as the latest poll shows support for King Charles has risen sharply. 62% believing he'll be good for the monarchy. Last year, only 39% believed he would be a good king. Let's get more now with our royal reporter Cameron Walker joining us from outside Buckingham Palace, because amid, of course, all the preparations for the celebrations, Cameron, there are these questions about what sort of monarchy this will be in this Carolingian age, and particularly as King Charles meets Rishi Sunak today and the Speaker of the House of Commons, both constitutional monarch and parliamentary leaders as well.
Absolutely. It's a very busy time today here, Mark, at Buckingham Palace. And, of course, Princess Anne is the King's sister. And we have heard rumour after rumour that the King wants a slimmed-down monarchy. But, according to Princess Anne, who spoke to Canadian broadcaster CBC, she doesn't think that that is particularly a good idea. Now, Princess Anne is dubbed most of the time as the hardest working royal. 2022, she did the most public engagements, tossing up 214. But she said that idea came about, the idea of a slimmed-down monarchy, when there was a lot more people around. And who have we lost in the last few years? Well, very sadly, we have lost Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. But, of course, we've also had Harry and Meghan stand back as working members of the royal family, and, of course, Prince Andrew being forced to step back as a working royal as well. So there's a much smaller pool of working royals to choose from when it comes to divvying out certain public engagements. And time after time, we are seeing that the public wants to see members of the royal family physically meeting them and cutting ribbons and things like that. And there has been some criticism, particularly actually of the Prince and Princess of Wales, for not doing enough of those public, personable hands-on engagements. They spend a lot more time behind the scenes working on long-term projects. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But another thing that Princess Anne actually mentioned during that interview was talking about the effect COVID had on her father, Prince Philip, talking of the thievery that COVID brought, particularly with the older generation. So let's have a listen.
We sometimes at home talk about COVID as a thief, in that it stole from a lot of people. Did it steal from you?
In some respects. I suppose I tend to think it stole a bit from my father, who, lost a lot of the people who would have gone to see him and talk to him and, have those conversations that kept him interested. And he lost all of that.
We all remember those tragic pictures, don't we, of the late Queen at Prince Philip's funeral during COVID, sat alone in St George's Chapel in Windsor, and something that we have, for the first time, I believe, heard a member of the royal family talk about that experience that coronavirus had, particularly on the older generation. Elsewhere here today, just half an hour or so ago, we saw the Queen Consort travel in a police escort towards Clarence House, just passing us here behind us at Buckingham Palace. The Queen Consort and the King are expected to be at a reception at Westminster Hall today, the oldest part of the parliamentary estate, traditionally the home of magnificent, extravagant state banquets. They no longer happen. They were stopped in the 1800s. But the King is expected to meet the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, leader of the opposition Sir Keir Starmer, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House. But also Buckingham Palace has described the event as an opportunity for the King and Queen Consorts to meet other politicians, other MPs with shared interests. So the King meeting MPs with a shared interest in environmentalism, sustainability and agriculture as well. The Queen Consort, literacy and tackling domestic violence. So a big, busy day for the King and Queen Consort ahead of their coronation on Saturday.
Indeed. We'll update people, of course, with that event at Westminster Hall. But it's interesting that Sir Lindsay Hoyle, as you mentioned there, the Speaker, saying that the King is a force for good. And basically, I think we've got Rishi Sunak there leaving 10 Downing Street, heading for Westminster Hall. And Sir Lindsay going on, Cameron, to say that Charles's reign will bring a new relationship between Parliament and the monarchy as he approaches the role with his own distinct style. And there is this question mark about how directly involved King Charles will be in politics with a small p.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that Charles, when he was Prince of Wales, got a fair bit of criticism about perhaps towing the line too much when it comes to politics. We all remember those so-called spider papers of when he was Prince of Wales, writing to government ministers and voicing his opinions or his concerns about various issues that were going on in Britain at the time. But the King has always maintained in interviews he's done as Prince of Wales that clearly he understands the difference between being an heir and being the sovereign itself. And I think we have seen that since he came to the throne in September, that he has not been outspoken on any issues. He's very much followed his mother's lead, the late Queen, and very much been a diplomatic king, and using that power of soft diplomacy when it comes to both meeting officials and also engaging with international allies around the world. So Buckingham Palace yesterday announced the fact that we're expecting 100 or so heads of state from around the world attending the coronation, and 203 countries around the world will be represented at the ceremony on Saturday. But of course, this is clearly the Westminster Hall reception that's going to be kicking off this afternoon is very much just about perhaps making friends and that power of soft diplomacy in action rather than any direct kind of talking about different policies, let's say.
Cameron at Buckingham Palace for the moment. Thank you for that. But let's indeed switch the focus from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall. And we've got the arrivals fairly imminently of the Prime Minister. We saw that motorcade just leaving 10 Downing Street a few moments ago. Just to remind you, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, who will be hosting both Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer, and indeed the King and Queen Consort, saying that I'm very excited that two members of the public will have the opportunity to see the Speaker's state coach. Of course, he put that on show the other day, used in so many historic state events, including the coronations of Her late Majesty, her father and grandfather. So I suspect Sir Lindsay might well be giving the Queen Consort and the King a more detailed look at that. The ornately carved carriage, of course, thought to be made for King William III and Queen Mary II in the 1690s. Bring you those pictures as soon as we get them. But the super fans, if we can call them that, for the coronation already gathering on the Mall in preparation for the big day on Saturday. Our national reporter, Thea Chicombo, is there for us. And we certainly saw the crowds there behind camera at Buckingham Palace. What about further up the Mall, Theo?
Yes, well, it's busy as well in this part of London. Thousands of people in this area, many of them tourists, but some of them have made this trip for the coronation this weekend. We spoke to a gentleman a few moments ago who's travelled all the way from Singapore. He said this is not the first time he's come to this country. He's come to several royal engagements and he's very much looking forward to what's happening this weekend. But along the Mall, there's some who've already started camping since last week, and others arrived yesterday and some this morning. And we had the pleasure of speaking to Anne, who travelled on an overnight bus to come into London, and she's pitching up her tent, and this is what she had to say.
Came up from Cardiff at 3 a.m. this morning, early, and I'm very excited. I wanted to get a nice position on the Mall and put my Welsh flags up, and it's going to be Prince Charles is going to make it a musical event, and we've got the Welsh harpist. We've got Bryn Torfell, which is a wonderful opera singer, baritone, singing Calon La. I'm looking forward to seeing the Golden Coach, and I'm looking forward to seeing the King and the Queen come down to be crowned. And I'm looking forward to the Welsh music. The hymns are going to be sensational.
Well, she's not the only one. This morning we spoke to Faith, who travelled from Essex. She's here until this weekend. She said she wanted to get a good spot, hence why she came several days in advance. I'm sure many of her friends will be coming as well. She mentioned one friend who's already in London who will be making her way to stay alongside her this afternoon. Many others will be joining them in the next few days as the temperatures increase here. The weather's good, but in the evening it is cold. So for those who have come to camp here, they're saying it's not going to distract them from staying here, because they're very much looking forward to what's going to be an historical event this weekend.
Yeah, maybe a woolly hat as well as a homemade crown. Good advice there, Theo. Thank you for that. Let's head back to Cameron at Buckingham Palace, because, Cameron, we've got a bit more detail about what might be happening, or at least who the King and Queen Consort will be meeting at Westminster Hall shortly.
Yes, indeed, Mark. Actually, this relates to after the Westminster Hall engagement. Right. Buckingham Palace have just released the following details. The King is going to be meeting the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, at Buckingham Palace a bit later on this afternoon, as well as the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, in a separate engagement, again at Buckingham Palace later on this afternoon. Tomorrow, the King is going to be meeting the New Zealand Prime Minister. You're sensing a theme here of the different realms and territories the King is head of state as, Chris Hipkins, again at Buckingham Palace. There's also, actually quite interesting here, on Thursday, the King is going to be meeting the leaders of the Canadian Indigenous leaders, again at Buckingham Palace. Clearly a nod to the Indigenous communities who live in Canada during his visit to Canada in May last year as part of the Platinum Jubilee celebrations. He made a point of spending a lot of time with Indigenous people and Indigenous leaders in Canada. And then on Friday, he will be meeting the realms, the Governor-Generals of the realms where he reigns as head of state at a Buckingham Palace reception. He's also going to be attending a Commonwealth Heads of Government leaders meeting at Marlborough House in London. And then, as has been widely reported, there is, confirmed now by Buckingham Palace, along with other members of the royal family, the King will be hosting a reception on the eve of the coronation for all the heads of state and overseas guests who have come to London specifically for the coronation. So a lot of detail to sink your teeth into there, but all now confirmed by Buckingham Palace.
Yeah, interesting that clearly the Commonwealth is really at the top of these various events. And we had Sir Lindsay Hoyle earlier saying the King was a force for good who would unite the Commonwealth. Clearly that the King is wanting to carry on that emphasis that the late Queen Elizabeth had so much for the Commonwealth, and it's good.
Absolutely. I think it's very much the power of soft diplomacy in action here, Mark. But of course, we know that the late Queen had a huge sense of responsibility and love for the Commonwealth, and that is something which King Charles, as the new head of the Commonwealth, is really following through here. And clearly he is also aware that he is the head of state in 15 realms and territories across the world, including Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and he is clearly making a point here in the week of the coronation to meet with the prime ministers of the different realms and territories, but also bringing together different nations, particularly on Friday with that reception supported by other working members of the royal family on the eve of the coronation, very similar to the reception held actually on the eve of the Queen's funeral back in September. That soft diplomacy in action, kind of making friends with different nations as the monarchy does so well, and that is what I think the British government sees the monarchy as a real asset in terms of those international relations.
Just on that event on Friday, that's interesting, Cameron, because we were being told originally, of course, that the King wanted this curfew, I think, at 6 p.m, that he didn't want any kind of engagements after that time, so he'd be ready for the big day on Saturday.
Yes, exactly, but it appears he may have had a change of heart because Buckingham Palace has confirmed, as I said, him along with other members of the royal family, working members of the royal family, he will be hosting a reception for the overseas guests. It doesn't say which overseas guests are going to be attending, but clearly they confirmed yesterday that around 100 heads of state will be attending the coronation service at Westminster Abbey, and 203 different countries will be attending. So clearly I think the King is putting duty first before any personal feelings of tiredness ahead of his big day on Saturday.
No quiet cup of tea in that royal service with feet up the day before, it seems. But clearly the diary filling up. Cameron, thank you for that. Back to you a little later. And, of course, we'll update you on that occasion at Westminster Hall as well. But let's follow another very important VIP, certain Donald Trump, who, of course, is in Scotland at the moment. Now, this is Turnberry Golf Course, where he's expected to arrive shortly. Of course, he landed in Aberdeen aboard Trump Force One yesterday and headed up to his new golf course up in Aberdeenshire, which is Trump International Scotland. This is Turnberry, of course, down in South Ayrshire, bought back in 2014, and he spent millions of pounds renovating what is now a top-class golf course. I think there's quite a few people there waiting to welcome their boss, as he is. Whether he'll take to the fairways, we don't know. He certainly took to the links up in Aberdeenshire and hit a few golf balls yesterday. And he, I think, is then heading to Ireland tomorrow for another golf course to visit in County Clare. But the importance of this is it's first time he's been in the UK since leaving the White House. And, of course, he has made a comment about the 2024 presidential race, certainly reflecting on his Republican rival Ron DeSantis and, of course, on President Biden, who has already declared now that he will run for 2024. So we'll keep an eye on this, and as soon as we see Mr. President, as he still is, of course, Donald Trump arriving there, we'll update you on that. Also coming up, we'll be looking at what's happening with the health unions and the government meeting to discuss the pay deal. Will it leave the nurses out in the cold? We're getting an update on that shortly. Stay with us on GB News Live.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. I think we can take you live back now to Westminster, outside Westminster Hall, where the King and the Queen Consort are due imminently. We've, of course, seen Rishi Sunak leave number 10, and Sir Keir Starmer is due there as well for Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, to welcome the King to this banqueting hall, as it was, but of course it was to the location where the Queen's lying in state allowed people to pay their respects as they file past her coffin. Just to remind you, Sir Lindsay Hoyle has already been speaking about how the King is a force for good to unite the Commonwealth, he said, ahead of hosting the monarch at Westminster. And the Commons Speaker saying it was a wonderful privilege for him to be invited to the event on Saturday. But before he walks through the Abbey in full ceremonial dress, welcoming the King and the Queen Consort to Parliament effectively, Sir Lindsay saying that Sir Charles's reign would bring a new relationship between Parliament and the monarchy as King Charles approached the role with his own distinct style, said Sir Lindsay. Going on to say, I've got to say what a privilege that we've got the sadness of Her Majesty, but we've now got the sunrise of a new king coming. I think we can hear some pipes. Let's have a listen in. Yes, they're in the distance, but certainly some bagpipes playing, whether that's just the bystanders adding some flavour, whether it's actually part of the official welcome, we're not quite clear. But Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle saying he's met Charles on a number of occasions. Oh, that's better, there we go. Describing him as witty and charming, and genuinely believe that the King is a force for good, he said, but that he will also bring the Commonwealth together, ensuring there is a voice for the overseas territories. Just to remind you that Cameron, our royal reporter, the police outriders arriving there, Parliament Square, and there is the royal limousine, the Bentley, turning into the front of Parliament there and going straight to Westminster Hall, of course, the most ancient part of the Palace of Westminster. And as I was saying, Cameron, our royal reporter, updating us that The King's Diary filling up as we speak, meeting the Australian, Canadian and New Zealand leaders, and then the Canadian Indigenous leaders on Thursday. Friday, the Governors-General of the various territories and the Commonwealth heads of government. So despite, as we were originally believing, King Charles wanting a 6 o'clock curfew on the eve of the coronation to put his feet up, he'll be busy. Well, let's just update you with some other news now, where we're being told crucial talks between the NHS and unions later expected to pave the way for a 5% pay rise to be instituted for NHS staff in England, with a one-off pay deal for last year. Well, unions say it's almost certain that a majority has been reached in approving the deal, the government declaring the best and final offer. So Unison, GMB and those unions representing physiotherapists and midwives voting yes. But, of course, the Royal College of Nursing and Unite rejecting the offer. Unite taking yet more industrial action this week, and the RCN to ballot for more strikes. Let's bring in our Roy Lilly, health writer, commentator and, of course, former NHS administrator. Roy, where on earth does this leave the unions in particular, with the RCN, of course, now perhaps out on a limb, and maybe the government thinking they've achieved divide and rule to a degree?
I think that's probably right, you know. I mean, I'm pretty sure that the vote this afternoon will be carried and they will accept the deal. And I would then expect Steve Barclay to get the money and the cash lump sum payments into nurses' wage packets probably in June. So they'll have the money. Then the RCN have got a big problem. What do they do next? Well, their strike mandate runs out. It ran out with this last strike. There was a bit of an argument over with the actual day that it ran out. They went to court and they lost their action in court. So now they have to go back and ballot their members. The RCN have a council meeting tonight where they'll be discussing their next moves. If they do decide to ballot their members, I mean, the council could say we can see no prospect of improving the deal and we're not going to ballot members for a strike. It's unlikely that they'd say that. I think they probably will go to a ballot. If they go to a ballot, the nurses have got the money. I think it's going to be a very fine ballot. The RCN are changing the rules this time as well. This is what's called an aggregated ballot. So that means that all the votes to strike or not to strike will be added up globally rather than just added up for each of the hospitals. So
what do you make
by putting them all together, they can bring all the nurses out on the same day.
Really? Because I was just looking at the comments from Dr. Peter Carter, former leader, of course, of the RCN, saying he didn't believe that the action was backed by most members, even though, of course, that ballot actually rejected the latest offer, and that basically maybe, they are getting a bit exhausted by it all.
I think Peter Carter's right. I mean, if you look at the numbers, I mean, first of all, let me explain. The RCN is a Royal College of Nursing. Yeah. The union bit and going on strike was really only tagged on in 2006. Most nurses belong to the RCN because they have a very good education offering. They have an indemnity insurance, which the nurses all like to use. Student nurses, particularly in their preceptorship year, find it very useful. I think the reason to belong to the RCN for trade union purposes is probably only secondary. And if you look at the numbers of people who voted, whilst it is true to say a majority of those who voted did vote for strike action, Peter Carter's right, is if you look at the membership globally, almost as many people didn't bother to vote, didn't want to be involved in voting. Now, you can't count people who don't vote, but I think the spirit of what he's saying is probably right, that the nurses are not keen on the idea of striking all out on the same day and no derogations, which is what they're talking about, I think might be an ask too far.
Yeah, a little bit nuanced, perhaps. Well, we'll see what, of course, happens at this meeting. We have to get away to the news bulletins, but as ever, Roy, thank you for updating us with your expert assessment. We'll see what emerges, of course, later this lunchtime. As we say, we'll update you on that. But let's get an update on all the headlines now. Tamsin's waiting for us.
Mark, thank you. Here are the headlines at 12:34. A nurse accused of murdering 7 babies and attempting to kill 10 others is giving evidence for the first time today. 33-year-old Lucy Letby is on trial at Manchester Crown Court for the offences alleged to have taken place between June 2015 and June 2016. Letby from Hereford denies all the offences alleged to have taken place at the neonatal unit of the Countess of Chester Hospital. Unions and NHS employers are meeting today in the hope to resolve the long-running pay dispute between health workers and the government. Members of the Royal College of Nursing and Unite have rejected the government's offer of a 5% pay rise for this year and a cash sum for last year. But other unions, including Unison, the GMB and those representing midwives and physiotherapists, have voted in favour. Food inflation went up to another record high in April, but lower prices are on the horizon, according to the British Retail Consortium. Grocery prices rose by 15.7% last month, the biggest annual increase in records going back almost 2 decades. The figures show that prices for non-food items slowed, however, because of spring discounts on clothing and furniture. Meanwhile, house prices showed signs of stabilising last month, according to mortgage lender Nationwide. The price of a home rose by 0.5% after falling for the past 7 months. Compared to April last year, the average house price was down 2.7%. The final flights evacuating British nationals from Sudan are due to land in Britain today. Sudanese doctors working for the NHS are among the passengers. According to government figures, almost 2,200 people have been evacuated. Kensington Palace has released a photograph of Princess Charlotte to mark her 8th birthday. The picture was taken by her mother, the Princess of Wales, in Windsor this weekend. The Princess is 3rd in line to the throne. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us 4, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, Sue Gray has reportedly held secret talks with Sir Keir Starmer while working for the team advising the Commons Partygate investigation. The former senior civil servant is to become the Labour leader's chief of staff, but pending the result of 2 inquiries over whether Whitehall rules were broken. And in the past few minutes, Downing Street has declined to comment, they say in detail, on an expected written statement to the Commons today to contain an update into the circumstances leading to the resignation of a senior civil servant. The Prime Minister's official spokesman on press whether such a publication would be indeed on Sue Gray and whether it could clash with Purdah rules ahead of the local elections, basically saying that those were aimed at avoiding issues that would have significant impact on those elections. So it's all a bit muddy. And Downing Street also saying the Prime Minister had full confidence in the current Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case. What does this all mean? Our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Hardwood, joins us now in the studio. I guess if you say to most people out on the street, Sue Gray and indeed Simon Case, they'll say who. Is this a bit of Westminster bubble or is there real significance in what's being discussed today?
I think that's certainly the case with Simon Case. However, Sue Gray did become a bit of a household name. For months, we were waiting for Sue Gray as if we were waiting for Godot, and her investigation went on and on and on, interrupted, of course, by a Met Police investigation. People around Boris Johnson, friends of Boris Johnson, believed that Sue Gray was critical in terms of bringing him down as a Prime Minister.
In terms of the investigation into the parties and the cake and the bottles and the rest of it.
And all of that. Yeah. And the curious thing, of course, is that in recent months we've learnt that Sue Gray has been in talks with the Labour Party and has agreed to join the Labour Party as Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, raising a lot of eyebrows in the government, raising questions of when these talks started. It is against civil service rules. It's against the Civil Service Code of Conduct for senior civil servants to meet opposition members of Parliament without direct sign-off by the government minister in question. And it appears that this is what has gone on. While Sue Gray was working for the government, handling a lot of sensitive information for the government, speaking in secret to the Labour Party. Now, it must be said that the Labour Party says that they weren't speaking to Sue Gray while that initial Partygate investigation was going on, the one that happened before Boris Johnson left Number 10. But it does appear that the conversations between Sue Gray and the Labour Party were taking place in this Commons Partygate investigation, which Sue Gray herself advised. This is the one in terms of whether Boris Johnson misled Parliament or not. The allegation is that Sue Gray was in conversations then, did not declare it to ministers and therefore broke the Code of Conduct. I have to say, this is all conjecture at this point. We know that there will be a statement on a relation to do with this later this afternoon in the Commons, and that's when it will be cleared up.
Yeah. Now, Sir Keir Starmer has gone public already, saying he had no discussions while she was a civil servant investigating Boris Johnson, and he was confident she had not broken any rules. But it's widened a little bit now. We mentioned Simon Case, who's the Cabinet Secretary. Downing Street has had to take the time and trouble to say the Prime Minister has full confidence in him, but facing questions amid reports that his personal views towards Sue Gray were partly behind a push for her to be wait a considerable period, as it was before taking up the role with Sir Keir Starmer. I mean, it's getting a bit sort of muddy. Is that the right phrase, I guess?
Well, there are those around the Labour Party who've been saying that Simon Case is not a neutral arbiter in this case because Simon Case was criticised in the Sue Gray report. The civil service culture was criticised in the Sue Gray report. Let's not forget that while Boris Johnson got most of the headlines, most of the rule-breaking was not done by Boris Johnson or indeed by senior political figures. Only 2 fines went to cabinet ministers, Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson. The rest of the 100-plus fines went to civil servants.
Staffers.
Most of the time when the political leadership wasn't there. So the civil service leadership got a lot of the ire in this report, and the allegation goes that, therefore, Simon Case doesn't much like Sue Gray. I'm not sure how much that holds water, however, because Simon Case has not been criticised as being a party political figure in the past.
How much more do you think we're going to learn from Parliament this afternoon? Or is it still going to be going round in circles, do you think?
We're not going to get all the information this afternoon, but we will certainly know some of the dates involved, which so far we have not learned. And we might even know if Sue Gray is prevented for working for the Labour Party for a year, perhaps a year and a half, which would be crucial. The reason Keir Starmer wanted to hire her was to build up this operation before a potential entry into number 10. He wouldn't be able to do that, and he would have egg on his face if Mr Rules has been found to broke the rules.
Got it here first. Thank you for that. And, of course, we'll update people from those events in Parliament a little later. But let's update you now on the latest snapshot of the economy. And most economists expecting average house prices to fall last month. Of course, all the effects of what's been happening with ever higher interest rates. But the latest data from mortgage provider Nationwide Building Society showing an unexpected rise in April. Property prices up by 0.5% on the month after 7, remember, consecutive falls, although we should still add, in terms of the annual figure, still 2.7% down than last year. Well, let's break the figures down a little bit more now with Liam joining us with On the Money. So safe as houses once more?
I think
maybe
this is a mixed picture. Look, if you're a young person trying to get on the housing market, the fact that house prices are going up again month on month is not what you want to hear. That deposit that you're trying desperately to save as your wages are going down after inflation is less likely to get you a house because house prices have gone up. Let's have a look at some of the numbers here. I can put them in a graphic for you. So in March, Mark, the average house price across the UK was £257,122, and then it rose in April to £260,441. Now, that's up slightly what we call month on month. There you go. It's up 0.5%, as you said. But it's down compared to April last year by 2.7%. And just moving on, these numbers are from the Nationwide, and the Nationwide told us that prices now are 4% below their peak in August 2022. So they're still down a bit. And Nationwide are talking about tentative signs of recovery in the housing market, only tentative. Mortgage approvals, while they're not as bad as they were after that Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng mini-budget, they're still 40% down on February 2022. Mortgage approvals, of course, are what drive the housing market because most people are buying with a home loan. But Nationwide, finally, Mark, are now saying that there are signs of pickup in mortgage applications. But I am ambivalent about this increase. I'm in two minds whether or not it's a good thing.
Because, and the other aspect, I mean, there is a seasonal aspect to this, isn't it? The spring is when people start looking at property in the housing market. They go out and start, you know, looking in the estate agents' windows. So it does have that sort of stimulus to a degree. I guess that the thing is whether this is actually part of a bigger recovery, the green shoots that we talked about, or whether it's just like a seasonal uplift that will last a month or two.
There is a lot of seasonality in the housing market, of course. But on the other hand, that inflation number we had in March, 10.1%, where most people thought it would go down into single digits, that means there will be at least one more interest rate rise, probably two more interest rate rises, and that will stymie mortgage affordability. That means it's more expensive to borrow money, and that means that house prices are less likely to rise. I think house prices are going to be pretty flat for at least the next few months until interest rates, Mark, are absolutely and decisively on their way down towards the end of the year, and that won't happen until inflation is decisively on its way down.
And while we're mentioning inflation, I mean, we've got food prices still up 15.7%, even though overall retail inflation is 8.8% because we've got spring sales and footwear. Now, we've got Sir Ed Davey, Liberal Democrats, and, of course, there is a local election on, and he has said that he wants the Competitions and Markets Authority to actually look at whether there has been, we've spoken about this, a sort of inflation in terms of the supermarkets imposing higher prices to increase their margins.
You and I spoke about this just a couple of weeks ago. Remember I said that when the inflation number came out, we said, but food price inflation has gone up from 18% to 19.1%. That's completely nuts.
I'm just going to interrupt, Liam, because we've got a certain Donald Trump arriving on the scene. So let's just have a look at the pictures as It's not a presidential motorcade, of course, but it is a motorcade nevertheless, with plenty of vehicles. And just to reflect, he still has a Secret Service detail. This is Turnberry, the golf course in South Ayrshire that he opened back into, well, police presence there as well in 2014. So he's got the full panoply of security around him. We don't know if he's going to speak here. Certainly he was out, of course, on that Aberdeenshire golf course, just mentioning bypassing the fact that he wanted to make America great once again, because, yes, we've got that 2024 presidential race with the fact that Trump is actually leading the Republican ticket ahead of Ron DeSantis, and indications, of course, that he may well be doing battle with Joe Biden in terms of, well, both of them elder statesmen as they are now. I think we've got pipers there and drummers and his staff waving their caps in the air. It is, of course, a championship golf course, but whether, in fact, he'll be bringing his clubs, we don't know, because he's going to be heading to County Clare then tomorrow to another of his courses. There we go. And he's got the Make America Great Again baseball cap on.
It's almost as if he's kind of trolling Joe Biden, is it? Particularly going to the west of Ireland there.
Yeah.
You mentioned County Clare. And let's be clear, Mark, this guy is likely to get the Republican nomination. He's likely to be the candidate that the Republicans put up. The only person who's likely to beat him is Ron DeSantis. And I almost think that the Democrats are attacking Trump in the courts, of course, in New York, in order to stir up his base to make sure he gets the nomination.
Yeah.
Because in the end, Trump is less likely to beat Biden in a straight contest because he is shrouded in scandal, for better or for worse, though he denies wrongdoing. And Ron DeSantis, the polling shows, is more likely to beat Biden in a straight runoff, the Florida governor.
The Trump lead in double figures over DeSantis at the moment, which is interesting. So clearly the pipes are reeling, and we've got the applause as well they might, because those are all employees, of course, at the course, including the catering staff out there in force. No red carpet up the stairs, but we saw that at Aberdeen Airport yesterday. But just to give you a little taster, that we'll be learning more with Nigel tomorrow on the Farage programme with a full interview, and perhaps we'll learn a little bit more about the political side of things rather than the sporting side of things. But he does look dressed for golf, we have to say. But back to Turnberry a little later. More from Liam later in the programme as well on the economy and the various figures. But let's just break away now to reflect on what's been going on in Paris, where we saw there's extraordinary pictures, tensions boiling over on the streets, and other cities too, Nantes and Rennes, as police clash with protesters during the largest May Day protest in some 30 years. One protester lost a hand, blown off by a stun grenade. Police set on fire by Molotov cocktails, one quite badly burnt, indeed requiring hospital treatment, being burnt on his face and body. And as we say, yeah, well, obviously you can see the violence there with the bins being overturned and the Molotov cocktails being fired. That was yesterday, just to remind you. And also in Nantes, that protester reportedly having a hand blown off by a stun grenade. Well, those protests triggered by President Macron's decision to raise the retirement age to France to 64, up from 62. But let's get more now with Paris-based journalist Peter Allen, because Peter, certainly the correspondent we spoke to yesterday, was saying there's another element to do with this, and that is the, not anarchists as such, but certainly those determined to protest at the sort of rule of law, as they say, and the autocratic way that Macron has imposed these things.
Yes, Mark, there's a feeling amongst many here, including moderates, that democracy is under attack across the French Republic. Emmanuel Macron has used presidential decree to bring in raising the retirement age from 62 to 64. That's absolutely legitimate according to the Constitution of the Fifth Republic. But it's a constitution that gives massive power to the president. He's, of course, got a parliament there. Technically, he can govern with a prime minister and with MPs, of course, but he's doing that less and less nowadays. And there's a lot of people who think that's a very, very bad thing. That's why opinion polls show that about 70% of the country is against this particular measure to raise the retirement age. But what we're looking at now is the sharp end of the protest movement. I was out at that riot, let's call it what it was, yesterday, and that was an incredible level of violence. Molotov cocktails, we say, being thrown at police, windows being smashed everywhere, banks being attacked. Really, really unpleasant. Gerald Darmanin, the Interior Minister, said today that the aim of this crowd was to kill a policeman. And looking at some of the things that went on, I think that's probably a fair thing to say. So very, very ugly times at the moment here in France, Mark.
Yes, indeed. I mean, as we saw those police officers, or CRS, perhaps, riot police being set on fire with Molotov cocktails, and protesters using staves, the police with the batons and riot shields, and a water cannon as well on the streets of the French capital. So do you think there will be now a reassessment by both sides of where this has taken France?
I think effectively it will carry on as before, if I'm perfectly honest. This was the 13th official demonstration against Macron's pension reforms. That's 13 whole days, obviously over a number of weeks. And there's been lots of unofficial protests in between. I say official in the sense that the local council allows the marchers a particular route, and the government says that it's an important thing for people to be out on the street demonstrating, if not rioting. But it's the way France is organised. This kind of thing has been going on for years here. France is a revolutionary republic, of course. It's a protest nation. And one would expect that Emmanuel Macron, of course, will be watching what's happening and will be very, very concerned at how violent things are getting. But he's promised there'll be no U-turns. What has happened in the past, in the very recent past, is that presidents have capitulated to the street when the going gets very, very rough and very, very hot out on the streets. They pull back on legislation. Emmanuel Macron says he's not going to do that. He's going to throw his paramilitary police at the problem. Thousands of them in Paris yesterday, 5,000, 14,000 across the country. He's increasing the number of paramilitary units. He's going to fight the dissent and push through his reforms. And in turn, those who oppose him will carry on opposing.
And I guess politically, he doesn't really have much to lose. He's in his second term. He doesn't have to worry about running again for office, effectively.
That's a crucial point. The first election, he's one of the luckiest politicians in the world, or you could argue he's one of the best politicians in the world strategically. First ever election he ever stood in was to become president of France. He won a second term after that, and now he has got 4 years left. He'll still be in his 40s, would you believe it, when he ends, and that'll be it. It'll be finished.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, Peter, updating us here in Paris. And, of course, we'll see what emerges in these weeks ahead. Coming up here on GB News Live, back to Scotland, where Trump is at Turnberry. Just to remind you, he's with Nigel and Farage programme tomorrow. Also, we'll be updating you as the King and Queen Consort are at Westminster Hall, ahead, of course, of the preparations for the coronation. All the latest coming up for you here on GB News Live.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope? It's very much so. And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 1 o'clock. Very good afternoon. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Tuesday lunchtime, King Charles is meeting the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in Westminster Hall as we speak, ahead of the coronation. And it comes as Princess Anne appears to disagree with her brother's plans for the monarchy, saying a slimmed-down version was not a good idea. Could there be a cure for the health strikes today? Unions and the government are meeting to decide on their pay deal, but it could leave the nurses still out in the cold. Elsewhere, teachers have walked out today, and they're now marching on Downing Street as the spring of discontent grumbles on. And the nurse, accused of murdering multiple babies at the Countess of Chester Hospital, has told a jury she had not harmed any children, will be at Manchester Crown Court for the latest live from the Lucy Letby trial. Also coming up, as he steps down from a key position at Google, the godfather of artificial intelligence warns that technology may not be too clever for us all in the long run. Should we shut up shop on the chatbots? First, let's get the latest headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you, and good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 1 minute past 1. A nurse accused of murdering 7 babies and attempting to kill 10 others is giving evidence for the first time today. 33-year-old Lucy Letby is on trial at Manchester Crown Court for the offences alleged to have taken place between June 2015 and June 2016. Letby from Hereford denies all the offences alleged to have taken place at the neonatal unit of the Countess of Chester Hospital. Unions and NHS employers are meeting today in the hope to resolve a long-running pay dispute between health workers and the government. Members of the Royal College of Nursing and Unite have rejected the government's offer of a 5% pay rise for this year and a cash sum for last year. But other unions, including Unison, the GMB and those representing midwives and physiotherapists, have voted in favour. Food inflation went up to another record high in April, but lower prices are on the horizon, according to the British Retail Consortium. Grocery prices rose by 15.7% last month, the biggest annual increase in records going back almost 2 decades. The figures show that prices for non-food items slowed because of spring discounts on clothing and furniture. House prices showed signs of stabilising last month, according to mortgage lender Nationwide. The price of a home rose by 0.5% after falling for the past 7 months. Compared to April last year, the average house price was down 2.7%. Teachers across England are striking today in an ongoing pay dispute, with hundreds marching outside the Department of Education. In April, members of the National Education Union overwhelmingly rejected a pay offer. The NEU, along with 3 other teaching unions, has rejected an offer which included a £1,000 one-off payment and a 4.3% pay rise for most staff in September. Today's walkout is the 5th undertaken by educators this year, causing major disruptions. But NEU representative Daniel Hearn says that teacher retention and resources are already causing disruptions in the classroom.
Already want to cause disruption to students. The thing is, disruption is already being caused to students by things like retention, by things like lack of resources. So, if anything, this strike is to avoid further disruption. And ultimately, you can't say that you value education and then not value teachers.
Oil giant BP is reporting stronger than expected profits in the first 3 months of 2023, reaching close to £4 billion. The result was a reduction from the £4.96 billion that BP made in the same quarter last year, but well ahead of the £3.4 billion that analysts had expected it to make. An update on the review into the departure of former senior civil servant Sue Gray to join the Labour Party will be presented to MPs. A statement will be issued by the Cabinet Office, which will shed light on how Miss Gray came to switch from her high-ranking Whitehall position to take a job as the Labour leader's Chief of Staff. Miss Gray, who led a government investigation into allegations of parties being held in Downing Street during the coronavirus lockdown, could be found to have broken the Civil Service Code when she entered talks with the Labour Party. Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds has praised Sue Gray as one of the best people in government.
She wasn't the original person investigating these Partygate scandal allegations. It was somebody else. He unfortunately had to resign because he'd been at the parties he was supposed to be investigating. So look, we're trying to pick the best people to help us build a team for government. We'll follow the official process, whatever it might be, to get those people.
Princess Anne says she believes King Charles will not be changed by his new role as monarch. Talking with the Canadian broadcaster CBC ahead of the coronation, Princess Anne said the King, like the rest of the family, is committed to public service. But the Princess Royal argued that slimming down the royal family doesn't sound like a good idea. In response to reports, the King may reduce the number of working members of the family and their staff.
Well, you know what you're getting because he's been practising for a bit. And I don't think he'll change. He is committed of his own level of service, and that will remain true.
While staying with the King and the coronation, councils in England have approved more than 3,000 road closures for street parties during the coronation. The most popular day for the royal celebration is Sunday, when 62% of festivities will take place. The street parties will cover a total of 263 miles. And King Charles's coronation is expected to provide a £120 million boost to pubs across the UK. The British Beer and Pub Association says local pubs and breweries are planning to pour 62 million pints over the bank holiday weekend. And pubs will be allowed to stay open until 1 a.m. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Tamsin, thank you. That beer looks better each time you see it, doesn't it? And extraordinary intervention now in the lead-up to the coronation, with Princess Anne declaring that a slimmed-down monarchy does not sound like a good idea. Well, the Princess Royal giving that interview to the Canadian broadcaster CBC, saying the idea was originally mooted when there were a few more people around.
Oh, I think the slim down was said in a day when there were a few more people around to make that seem like a justifiable comment.
The world changes a bit.
It changes a bit. I mean, it doesn't sound like a good idea from where I'm standing, I have to say.
I'm sure it does
I'm
not
not quite sure what else, we can do.
Well, those comments also coming as the latest poll shows support for King Charles has risen sharply. 62% now believing he will be good for the monarchy. last year. Of course, only 39% believed he would be a good king. Let's speak now to royal historian David Starkey, that can join us there outside Buckingham Palace. As, of course, David, we've got the King and the Queen Consort meeting Sir Lindsay Hoyle further away at Westminster Hall. Interesting to look at what Sir Lindsay Hoyle has said about a new relationship between Parliament and the monarchy as the King approaches the role with his own distinct style.
Well, it is indeed a new relationship, because this is the first time since the end of the 17th century, since 1689, that every member of Parliament, member of the House of Lords, member of the House of Commons has not been present at the coronation. I mean, Mark, I've just got a little niggle of doubt at the back of my mind. When next the sovereign grant, that's the percentage of the income of the Crown estates that pays for the monarchy, comes up to be reviewed by Parliament, I think there are going to be a lot of lords, a lot of MPs, and particularly their wives saying, I wasn't at the coronation, I don't feel terribly generous.
Oh, so maybe not quite so inclusive an event as perhaps it should have been. But, I mean, it's interesting in terms of this assessment of where the monarchy will be politically from Sir Lindsay. And, of course, they're meeting as we speak, because he's obviously looked at the relationship, too, with the Commonwealth. And Cameron was telling us we've got the Australian, the Canadian, the New Zealand leader, then the Canadian Indigenous leaders, and then we've got the Commonwealth heads of government at Marlborough House, all in this week. So really the emphasis is still very much on the Commonwealth too and its importance. Though those figures will be at that coronation.
They will indeed be. I mean, and clearly, Mark, the Commonwealth is immensely important. It was something that was profoundly valued by the late Queen. But let's be frank, King Charles is primarily king of the United Kingdom, of Great Britain. We are his constituency. We don't vote for him, but, very clearly, and again, Princess Anne put this beautifully, it does depend on consent. The monarchy depends on consent, and it depends fundamentally on the consent of the British people. And that's something that's got to be retained and developed. Now, the opinion polls are good news, that's 62%. But, let's be truthful, opinions change. They change dramatically quickly. Look at the change from last year, when it's 30-odd, to 62 now. Well, I'm afraid it can just as easily swing back.
And, of course, we were interpreting perhaps the King's position as a more modern, slimmed-down monarchy, not quite so much flummery and so on. But interesting then to interpret Princess Anne's or the Princess Royal's comments that maybe that wasn't quite so a good idea, and that decision made perhaps when a few more were around. So will there be a reassessment, do you think?
I think there needs to be a rethink. And again, there's a contradiction between what the King says and the means that he's apparently trying to use to bring it about. I mean, the King wants, clearly, a monarchy which is inclusive of all sorts of special interest groups, faith groups in society, charitable groups in society. But they all depend on royal patronage. They all want some royal who will visit them, talk to them, be their patron. And there are just not enough of them to go round. Three of the most hard-working royals, Princess Alexandra, the Duke of Kent and the Duke of Gloucester, they're in their 80s. They're the late Queen's cousins, We'd love them to be there forever, but they won't be. And another generation has got to be nurtured. But there is a problem, isn't there, that the children of the Prince and Princess of Wales, we're looking at another 15, 20 years before they are ready to take part as, full working royals, at least.
Yeah, but certainly in terms of that 62%, we can see perhaps evidence behind you there as increasing numbers there gather on the Mall and head down towards Buckingham Palace. I have to rain on your parade, however, just to warn you, the latest we're getting from the Met Office, they're talking about rain and thunder showers on Friday and then rain Saturday afternoon. So you may be investing in a brolly before the big event on Saturday. We don't know. But, David, for the moment, thanks for joining us down there on the Mall. Let's talk to now those super fans already gathering in the Mall for preparation of the big day. Our national reporter, Theo Chikomba, is there for us. Theo, I don't know if you were hearing what I was telling David there, but the Met Office is saying, difficult to say what the weather will be like with any certainty, but a good idea perhaps for fans to wear their raincoats and take their brollies. And we've already, of course, seen the tarpaulins in evidence there in the Mall behind you.
That's right, yes. Well, we do live in the UK. You have to be prepared for whatever the weather. I think lots of people will be bringing their umbrellas, rain jackets and so on, so that they don't miss the special occasion which is taking place this weekend. But thousands of people have been descending into this area throughout the day to come and see what's happening. The flags are up. People are bringing their chairs and putting decorations and so on ahead of the coronation, which is just a few days away. But we've spent the last few hours speaking to people, asking about how much they're looking forward to the coronation, but most importantly, whether they think King Charles is going to be a good king or whether or not the royal family need to modernise in times like today. And this is what they had to say.
He's got a hard act to follow with his mum. So I think he's got, he had a great teacher with Her Majesty. I think he's going to make some changes, which I think is needed after, 60, 70 years of the Queen. But I think he's going to do a good job overall, absolutely.
I mean, he was great as a prince, so I think he'll be great as a king. He doesn't interfere, but he says, I want this, and hopefully they'll listen to him.
I think they do need to modernise, but I do think our country benefits from having a royal family. So I wouldn't want to see them disappear, but I think some modernisation is probably needed.
Well, Theo, having rained on your parade, let me just bring you a bit more we're getting from the Met Office. They're telling us actually it's now expected to be warm and humid with temperatures up to 20 Celsius, so a good temperature for those turning up. But have you managed to ascertain how many people are coming from abroad, those that you've spoken to? I mean, is this still very much a London crowd there in the Mall, or international travellers starting to arrive now?
No, definitely not. There's people from all sorts of places. We've seen Americans. I spoke to a gentleman from Singapore in the last hour, and others who have come from places like Italy and Spain as well. We had a little bit of a language barrier when we did speak to them, but they have come to the UK for this weekend to celebrate alongside millions of others and thousands of others who will be in this area particularly. So there are people coming from all over the UK.
Yeah, and the high-vis jackets already in evidence there, as indeed are the flags of the Commonwealth there as well, that we can see ahead, of course, the meeting all these politicians later this week. Theo, for the moment, thank you for joining us there in the Mall. Back to Theo throughout the day as the crowds gather. But let's reflect now on the other stories of the day, because pupils have been facing yet more disruption, with tens of thousands of teachers walking out today and sixth form colleges being hit as well across England. Well, members of the National Education Union are on the picket lines in the long-running dispute over pay. 4 education unions, indeed, say they could stage joint industrial action in the autumn term after members voted to reject the government's latest pay offer. Let's go live now to join our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, Anna Riley, to get the latest there. Anna, it seems that obviously they are digging in for what may be a protracted industrial dispute.
That's it, yes, all those teaching unions coming together in solidarity, and talks that this could be going on into autumn now if they don't get that pay rise that they want from the government. And here it has been combined industrial action in Leeds city centre. It wasn't just the teachers union, but also the RCN, the Royal College of Nursing, nurses coming together, and also the RMT. And they said they were all coming together in solidarity, asking for that pay rise from the government to be in line with the rising cost of living and inflation. And teachers here also telling me that it's about retention of teachers and also recruitment that's an issue in the education sector at the moment. I spoke to a teacher here, Darren Ging, and this is what he had to say.
Feel that we're on a downward spiral. We need to stop people leaving the job. It's not just teachers, it's support staff, and that's having a direct impact on children. Support staff are going for jobs in supermarkets, Amazon warehouses. They can earn more money and it's less stress, and it's really sad to see.
So yes, and Darren helps children with special needs in schools, and he was saying how important it is to keep teaching assistants in the job. And as he just mentioned, he said many are going to work in supermarkets and warehouses because they're just paid more in those jobs.
Anna, thanks very much indeed for updating us there with the position up in Yorkshire. And, of course, just to remind you, I think the teachers in London have now reached Downing Street, where they're staging a demonstration in Whitehall. So that's the picture as far as the teachers are concerned. What about the NHS strike? Well, could there be a cure for that? At least some of the workforce. We'll have the latest on that for you coming up shortly. Stay with us.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, we believe crucial talks between the NHS and the unions are happening as we speak. They could pave the way for the 5% pay rise for NHS staff to be instituted across England. Unions say it's almost certain a majority has been reached in approving that deal from the government. The government saying that's the last and best deal it could offer. Unison, GMB and those unions representing physiotherapists and midwives all saying yes, but let's just reflect, of course, members of the RCN, the Royal College of Nursing and Unite, have still been staging industrial action, having rejected the deal, and the RCN could ballot for further strike action. Let's get more now of the political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's joining us in the studio. Darren, this is something they call the NHS Staff Council. When we say talks, I mean, we don't think these are negotiations. This is a bit of rubber stamping going on.
Yeah, effectively, because the unions, obviously, and their members have been voting over the last couple of weeks on that pay offer that was first unveiled, I think, back in February. I interviewed the Prime Minister about it at the time. That is that they're going to get a one-off payment, £1,655 for last year, and then a 5% pay rise going forward. Now, that's clearly below the rate of inflation, but as you say, it is something the government say is their last deal. And it looks like for a lot of NHS staff, with a lot of unions, some big unions there like the GMB and Unison, they are going to accept or have accepted, their members have accepted. So today is just kind of confirmation they're prepared to go for it.
But you can see, I mean, Unite yesterday having none of it, and of course the RCN also having rejected it. So, I mean, what is the position as far as the government is concerned? That do they think, they've achieved divide and rule, and maybe these other unions will just have to come round and accept this fait accompli?
Well, I think to a large degree, yes, that's what the government's hoping, in effect, that these unions will be slightly isolated. Now, we're talking about the Royal College of Nurses here, where there's been a lot of public sympathy for them. Their mandate ran out yesterday, effectively, so they're going to have to go and ballot their members again on whether they're prepared to take more strike action. Of course, their members rejected this deal that the government effectively is signing today. In saying that, what is interesting is that the Royal College of Nurses are going to do this on a national level, and there are certain thresholds you have to meet in order to get strike action. So it's a bit of a gamble on their part. And this is obviously not going to have an impact as well on the junior doctor strike that's happening with the British Medical Association.
Well, yeah, because we were learning that perhaps the BMA was considering putting doctors on the picket lines for the RCN. And, I mean, they're talking about a huge rise that they want, which
35%,
was 35%, as opposed to 19% the RCN were talking about originally. So it's not over yet. And, of course, the other aspect to this is that the RCN kept saying it's not just about pay, it's about conditions, retention of staff, and the fact that, we can't provide safe cover. Is there any acknowledgement from Steve Barclay and the Department of Health that, this is something that still needs to be addressed?
I mean, in the end, what we've heard from the unions time and time again is this issue when they say, like, you're taking this action, you're putting the NHS into peril, you're potentially risking patients' lives, and we heard that yesterday, didn't we, with the strike action. They would turn around and say, well, people's lives are already being put at risk because of the conditions that staff find themselves in, overworked, there's simply not enough. But let's be honest about this. The government would refute that and say we're pumping more money into national services we've had before, and there are more doctors and nurses, though obviously the population of the country is growing at the same time. In the end, this really, though, is about pay.
Yeah.
And that's where a deal will be done. The big question is, can the Royal College of Nurses really push the government, given the fact that so many unions have now accepted this deal? Can they get away with a better one?
Now, the other aspect is we've got the teachers' unions marching up Whitehall, the protest outside Downing Street as we speak, and again, a number of unions coming together saying that we're growing increasingly frustrated because the government is not moving on this. And I guess this goes back to Rishi Sunak with the whole issue of inflation, where they see any kind of major public pay offer or deal could add to inflation.
Yeah, that's clearly the argument the government's making, that sense that if they give lots of public sector workers a significant pay rise and inflation busting pay rise, that could make things worse. I think, frankly, though, what the government are trying to do here is wait this out. Because they...
Hand tough is the phrase.
Yeah, because they know inflation's going to fall, pretty much certain it is. The Prime Minister's obviously said to talk about halving it before the end of the year. And then you add to that as well that, let's be honest about it, these workers are not being paid for the strike days. There is only a certain point where striking doesn't become sustainable anymore for them. And I think what the government is probably hoping will happen, given the fact there's not going to be an election until next year, maybe even late next year, that actually they will wait this out. And in the end, the unions will settle for a deal akin to the one that many NHS workers have done so today.
Yeah, and just to reflect very quickly, of course, transport back on the agenda now as well. Train drivers as left to take strike action, RMT with another one. That seems to be bubbling back up as well.
Yeah, indeed, and there is no solution to that either. Now, in that circumstance, where I will agree is that is about conditions largely because we know the government's trying to transform the railways in terms of ticketing offices and the number of people, guards needed on trains, for example, and the automation around that and simply the way people travel these days and the impact the pandemic's had. So that is not simply about pay. That is about why the
conditions... A bit more complicated.
It's a bit more complicated, and it's really complicated because it involves different companies as well.
And different unions.
And different unions. And that is one, I think, that certainly was the first proper strike to begin and one that could well last for a lot longer.
Yeah. Darren, thank you very much for taking us through that. And, of course, we'll update people on this Staff Council meeting as it's underway. But let's bring in now Lucy Johnson, Health and Social Affairs Editor at the Sunday Express. Lucy, we were just discussing whether, Darren, we think probably this is just going to be an agreement rather than any kind of major negotiation. But it does question now what happens from now on for the nurses, the RCN members, and indeed those ambulance drivers who are members of Unite.
Yeah, it changes the tone of things indeed. But as we've seen, the Royal College of Nurses and Unite are digging in, and they are still very angry and indeed have said they will reballot their members later on this month for more strike action, which their mandate just ended and was deemed illegal, wasn't it? So, and it sort of begs the question, where does it go now? The last strike, as we know, they didn't have the exceptions. So critical care, life and limb care, as they call it, accident and emergency, cancer care, labour wards, they didn't agree to cover those, and only at the last minute did they bring in some last minute agreements with trusts on a case-by-case basis. So patients were put at risk. And I know I've spoken to health bosses who are just desperate. I think one of them said that he even had to, the nurses ignored their own agreement to go in and help in the intensive care unit and continued to strike, and he had to relocate patients in the intensive care unit. I think one of them was too ill to relocate. So that's putting those patients at risk. So it's very, very difficult. Despite this agreement now, it's not looking like it's particularly necessarily cleared the way.
Yeah, I think Colchester Hospital was actually reporting that situation where they were unable to get that extra care. I mean, Dr. Tim Cooksley, President of the Society of Acute Medicine, saying that, it's now an eternal winter in terms of trying to provide acceptable care. And then this interesting assessment by Dr. Peter Carter, former leader of the RCN, that nurses themselves perhaps are growing tired of this because they see what is happening directly in terms of providing critical care cover.
Exactly. And, speaking to nurses on the ground, they are getting pretty fed up with it. Obviously, they don't get paid. And I think there is a big debate among them about, this whole strike. And I think many of them just want to get and go back to work. But there are still this whole group of nurses that doesn't seem to be, going in this direction, is doubling down. And, this eternal winter is very evocative because, in fact, we have got 7.2 million still on the waiting list. The strikes so far, all of them to date, we've had 6 months of consecutive strikes, junior doctors, nurses, various other health workers. That's seen 500,000 operations and procedures cancelled. So, it's unquantifiable, the damage and the risk that's putting to patients. And I think, many of the nurses are getting fed up and just want to move on,
OK. Lucy, thank you very much indeed for your assessment. Of course, we'll see what emerges from this Staff Council underway as we speak. Thank you very much indeed. We'll have more on that coming up. Also, the situation in Sudan. Former Prime Minister warning ongoing violence could lead to one of the worst civil wars in recent history. Foreign Secretary to update the Commons a little later this afternoon. We'll have all that for you. First, though, latest headlines coming up with Tamsin.
Mark, thanks very much. Here are the headlines at 1:31. A nurse accused of murdering 7 babies and attempting to kill 10 others has given emotional testimony during her first time in the witness stand. 33-year-old Lucy Letby is on trial at Manchester Crown Court for the offences alleged to have taken place between June 2015 and June 2016. When asked by her defence lawyer if she'd intentionally done anything to hurt or kill the babies at the neonatal unit of the Countess of Chester Hospital, she denied it. Former US President Donald Trump is in Turnberry in Scotland, where he's at one of his golf resorts. One of his likely rivals for the 2024 Republican nomination, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, was also visiting the UK last week. Well, tomorrow night, Nigel Farage will have an exclusive interview with Donald Trump on his show at 7 p.m. here on GB News. Unions and NHS employers are meeting today in the hope to resolve the long-running pay dispute between health workers and the government. Members of the Royal College of Nursing and Unite have rejected the government's offer of a 5% pay rise for this year and a cash sum for last year. But other unions, including Unison, the GMB and those representing midwives and physiotherapists, have voted in favour. Food inflation went up to another record high in April, but lower prices are on the horizon, according to the British Retail Consortium. Grocery prices rose by 15.7% last month, the biggest annual increase in records going back almost 2 decades. But the figures also show that prices for non-food items slowed down because of spring discounts on clothing and furniture. House prices, meanwhile, showed signs of stabilising last month, according to mortgage lender Nationwide. The price of a home rose by 0.5% after falling for the past 7 months. Compared to April last year, the average house price was down 2.7%. Kensington Palace has released a photograph of Princess Charlotte to mark her 8th birthday. The picture was taken by her mother, the Princess of Wales, in Windsor this weekend. TV, online and on TuneIn, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2475 and €1.1380. The price of gold is £1,592.91 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 set 7,859 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Is watching.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, the unrest is continuing in Sudan. The country's former Prime Minister, Abdallah Hamdok, warning that the ongoing violence there could bring the country to the verge of a violent civil war. Well, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, has said that the British mission in Sudan is not over yet, despite the evacuation airlift seemingly having finished. He's due to appear in the House of Commons in the next hour to take questions and update MPs. But let's get the latest analysis now of the defence editor at the Evening Standard, Robert Fox, who's joining us. Robert, thanks very much indeed for your time. It looks as if, in terms of the evacuation, this is it. I think the planes due in from Cyprus fairly shortly, with perhaps those NHS doctors on board who aren't technically, some of them, British passport holders. I mean, how's the assessment of how we've handled this, bearing in mind the criticisms that this was a repeat of Kabul to an extent?
Well, it wasn't really a repeat of Kabul, but they were pretty slow off the mark. I think that's the understanding, because while the signs of civil war have been there for months in Sudan, that it just suddenly burst, accelerated out of control when these two generals decided to fight across Khartoum, a city of up to, in its greater area, 7 million. That made life very dangerous and very difficult. I think coordination, as it always does, was a little difficult to begin with, and other allied nations who helped a great deal proved just as effective. But in terms of numbers, I think the British did pretty well. The latest figures are 2,190 something, 198, 99. And I think we'll hear from the Foreign Secretary this afternoon. It isn't all over. I think there will be contingencies to get a plane into Port Sudan if more people can come forward. The really important piece, Mark, is that they're making this effort to broadcast through the BBC radio World Service, that people must come forward. They are aware of distressed people who are entitled to help from the British. Yeah. So don't say it's all over until it's all over.
Yeah, I think they've called it a pop-up radio service to help those people. I mean, we're learning that there are women and children trying to get on trucks to get across a long land crossing to Egypt, as you say, Port Sudan, and then over the water to get into Saudi Arabia. So there are various routes. But is the aspect too that a lot of the fighting is actually in Khartoum, and the rest of the country maybe isn't quite in the grip of as much conflict?
No, the rest of the country, if we can put it like that, and this is what is really worrying people, is in the grip of great deal of criminality, of banditry. And I think that this is what this breakdown of order, I don't know about law, is so concerning. And the other thing is that it's always been troubled, but there is signs of really bad things happening, violence in Darfur to the west, which has been a distressed region, a region of civic violence, again, gangsterism, banditry. The Janjaweed militia now, who seem to be informing and filling the ranks of one of the insurgent parties here, namely the Rapid Support Force, which is trying to hang on to the center of Khartoum. Am I making it sound complex? Yes, it is extremely complex, both nationally, within the different groups, ethnic groups, loyalties, including Islamists, but it's a terrible international playground again. And I think that's a big worry now.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the World Food Programme, as you say, talking about this ripple effect, and that it could destabilise the whole of that region. And we've had these reports about, the Wagner Group and the Russians being involved, who clearly want some kind of foothold in this region and access to the Red Sea and so on. I mean, is this going to play out into another sort of international East versus West, if you can put it that way.
Well, it's not even that. You're absolutely right. Wagner has been very active, not only in East Africa, but in West Africa. And they had a toehold in Libya, which geopolitically is not too far away. And the toehold, their allies there, Khalifa Haftar, has an interest in stirring it up in Sudan. Just to go to the regional aspect, that you have two sides here, and you have Saudi Arabia backing one side and the United Arab Emirates, who have been allies with Saudi Arabia in Yemen, now opposing them by supporting another ally. And of course, the one that really is cash rich and can pay for fighters is the UAE. It is extremely worrying because it makes the whole Red Sea area and East Africa, which is troubled anyway, what with Somalia and the pirates, and we know about that, and the Al-Shabaab. It is a very, very violent conflict, and these so-called regional conflicts don't stay regional for very long. Yeah. They always have a global reference.
Robert, thank you for that. And as you say, James Cleverly to update the Commons fairly shortly this afternoon on the situation. We'll see what he's got to say. But for the moment, thank you very much indeed for updating us. Well, from the foreign affairs with Parliament to the domestic political situation, and Sue Gray reportedly holding secret talks with Sir Keir Starmer while working for the team advising the Commons Partygate investigation. The former senior civil servant to become Labour leader's chief of staff, of course, pending the result of 2 inquiries over whether Whitehall rules were broken. Let's get more with our deputy political editor, Tom Harwood, joining us. Sir Keir Starmer saying, no, nothing happened, nothing to see, move on.
Yes, and this has been the line from the Labour Party, fairly obfuscatory over the last few months since this extraordinary news broke that probably the most famous civil servant in the land has defected from the government to the official opposition. Now, obviously, Sue Gray didn't just decide this on a whim. There will have been discussions that took place between Sue Gray and the Labour Party. The question is, when were those discussions held, and did it happen at a time when she was doing confidential government business? Did it happen at a time, for example, when she was advising the committee investigating Partygate, the parliamentary committee, on that side? And according to a report in The Telegraph this morning, that is exactly when these conversations would have taken place. Sue Gray is alleged to have been having conversations with Sir Keir Starmer's office at the time she was advising the parliamentary inquiry into Partygate. Now, we will know this for sure in a statement later this afternoon in the House of Commons, a written ministerial statement from the Cabinet Office Minister. But there are some big questions here, because the Labour Party has always said they weren't talking to Sue Gray whilst the Partygate inquiry was going on. But, of course, that's a bit of a semantic bit of wordplay, because there were 2 Partygate inquiries. There was the original one that was conducted while Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, and there was the secondary one that is the parliamentary one that has been taking place more recently, and that is when the conversations are alleged to have happened.
And the waters have been getting a little murky as well. I mean, it's interesting that Downing Street have taken, or the Prime Minister's official spokesman have taken the time and trouble to say that the Prime Minister had full confidence in a person called Simon Case, who's the Cabinet Secretary, because the suggestion is, there were reports at least, that his personal views as regards Sue Gray could have been behind a push for her to be waiting what was termed a considerable period before taking up this role with Sir Keir. So, I mean, there's another dynamic at play here.
Yes, people around the Labour Party, people more sympathetic to Sue Gray, allege that there is potentially a personal motivation in this investigation in terms of whether or not Sue Gray has herself breached the Ministerial Code of Conduct. And let's not forget that in order to breach the Ministerial Code of Conduct, all Sue Gray will have had to do is meet the Labour Party without telling a minister. It seems fairly likely that has happened and that there has been a technical breach there. But the issue with Simon Case is that he came under quite a great deal of scrutiny himself in Sue Gray's report into the partying culture in Whitehall and Downing Street. 2 cabinet ministers got fines, Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson, but there were over 100 fines issued. The vast majority went to the civil service, went to civil service leadership. And one of those civil service leaders, Simon Case, was criticised fairly heavily in that report. The allegation, therefore, is he wants his revenge.
OK, we shall see what emerges in that statement a little later. Tom, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's now take you to the former nurse Lucy Letby and her court hearing, taking the stand to give evidence at Manchester Crown Court, the first time, indeed, in a 7-month trial. The 33-year-old accused of the murders of 7 babies, the attempted murders of a further 10 babies at the Countess of Chester Hospital between 2015 and 2016. She denies all of those charges. Let's get more now with our North West of England reporter, Sophie Reaper, who's been at court for us today. And Sophie, of course, the significance, as we say, she's been taken to the stand for the first time now. Sophie, we've just got a problem with the sound for the moment. We'll just try and reconnect the line. Yeah, we've got you now loud and clear. Carry on.
Apologies there for those technical difficulties. As I was saying, the jury at Manchester Crown Court has heard from Lucy Letby for the very first time. They heard her questioned about her life building up to her career as a nurse, and then about those accusations that came in September of 2016. She told the court that her job was her life and that she'd always wanted to work with children. She said, "I'm there to help and to care, not to harm." When asked about being accused of harming those babies whom she'd been trusted to care for, she spoke of her devastation, becoming tearful as she explained, "I don't think you can be accused of anything worse than that." She then recalled, after the accusations, being diagnosed with depression and anxiety. She said, "I just changed as a person. My mental health deteriorated." She also told the court that eventually there were times when I didn't want to live and I thought of killing myself. Benjamin Myers, KC of the defence, then questioned Ms Letby about a post-it note that had been found in her home following her arrest. He asked her about various things that she'd written on the note, including things like "no hope" and "I killed them on purpose." She went on to explain that at the time the accusations that she was facing had made her feel that perhaps she wasn't good enough, and that, in fact, if she had made those mistakes that had potentially harmed babies, she felt then she must be an evil person. Now, court is expected to resume once again this afternoon after a short break here at Manchester Crown Court.
For updating us, and apologies just for the break-up on the signal there, but obviously back to you as those proceedings carry on this afternoon. Now, some business news with the oil and gas giant BP recorded bumper profits once again. They've hit £4 billion just for the first 3 months of this year alone, facing wider criticism with Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer calling for a proper windfall tax, whatever that is. Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davies saying it's a kick in the teeth for those struggling with high energy bills. Well, let's get more now with Liam with On the Money. Eye-watering figure, about 500 million more, in fact, than the city figures were expecting.
Yeah, but we've got to remember, Mark, BP is what we call a super major. This is one of the biggest oil and gas exploration companies and, indeed, one of the biggest renewables companies in the world. I was just going through the stock market announcement that BP published this morning, and I doubt many journalists will have been through it. And reading the fine print of the accounts, I discovered that less than a third of BP's refined products, so most of what they sell, were sold in Europe. So only a small part of a third of what they sold was sold in the UK. So it's not as if they're making this £5 billion in the UK. I mean, they're making it all around the world, and they're paying £1 billion in tax.
75% rate, isn't it, the windfall rate?
So it's wrong, actually. It's wrong of political leaders and campaigners to say they're making £5 billion in the UK, because they're not making £5 billion in the UK. Of course, they are a British company. Yeah. They're listed on the London Stock Exchange, but they make most of their money around the world. And as you say, they're paying 75% tax on those profits. But, you know, I was in Aberdeen last week. I just wanted to take us through a little bit of the history of the oil and gas industry in Aberdeen. In the UK, it employs 200,000 people, 25,000 odd in Aberdeen alone. Let's have a look at oil and gas production over the years from the UK. I've got a graphic here. Now, back in the early 2000s, Mark, you'll see that peak, the black line. we were pumping in the UK 2.5 million barrels of oil a day. That's 4% of total global production. And the blue line is oil equivalent. There's natural gas to the same amount of energy. So that's another 1.5 million plus barrels a day. You'll see that vertical line, that's where we are now. So we're below 1 million barrels a day and below 500,000 barrels a day for oil and gas, respectively. So North Sea oil is definitely diminishing. But we still get 3/4 of our total energy in this country from oil and gas. And half of that comes from the North Sea.
Yeah.
And there's a huge concern that 75% profit tax means that there's so little investment that North Sea oil is going to diminish very, very quickly.
Yeah.
That's the message that I had from a guy called Ross Dornan, who works for Oil and Gas UK. Here he is.
And we think that windfall taxes, like what's in place, well, actually the energy profits levy that's been put in place is really damaging. We've had 3 tax rates in the last year, 40% to 65% to 75%. And then it stopped becoming a windfall tax when the pricing mechanism was taken out of that. And that's undermining the confidence that companies have to work here in the UK, and it's driving potential investment to other parts of the world.
Now, this is interesting, and you made the point, BP actually no longer that active in the North Sea. It's these smaller companies that are really doing the exploring at the moment.
You don't, the big oil majors, they do still do some stuff in the North Sea. In particular, it's the big oil companies that are going to drive, the renewable sector in the UK.
Yes, yeah.
But in general, you're completely right. 2/3 of oil and gas we get out of the North Sea now, that's smaller, independent, British-focused companies, not global multinationals. They haven't got huge balance sheets. They've got huge debt.
Yeah.
They can't really take advantage of the tax breaks to invest because they can't raise the debt in the current climate.
Yeah, and talking those tax rates, what do you make of this now, where Sir Keir Starmer has said that the windfall tax has a loophole, as he described it, in terms of allowing them to reduce the amount they pay in tax if they invest in new oil and gas exploration, i.e. they can write down their tax by 91 pence in the pound for every pound they invest if they put money into the UK business. Now, that would seem actually sensible in terms of encouraging domestic production. Is it actually a loophole that ought to be closed?
Let's be completely clear, OK? You could be the most, pro-renewables person in this country. We are still going to need oil and gas until at least the late 2030s. It's not me saying that. It's the Climate Change Committee, which is the government-appointed body that's driving the net zero agenda. Even they say, headed by Lord Selwyn Gummer, even they say we're going to need oil and gas.
You just can't turn the taps off.
You can't. And you also need these oil and gas companies to do the drive towards renewables. Now, it is true, the way the government has set up the windfall tax is if you invest, you get a tax break. But that's the point, Mark, the point that you made. A lot of these companies in the North Sea, they are not the big multinationals. They are small, independent, British-focused companies. They can only invest if they can raise the finance to invest. They haven't got massive balance sheets. They can't raise the finance to invest because nobody wants to invest because the tax on profits has gone up from 40 to 65 to 75% in the last year. And that regime is now going to stay in place, not until 2025 to 2028. And is this really a windfall? Oil and gas prices now are much, much lower than they were before Putin invaded Ukraine.
I was going to ask
you... So how can politicians say these are war profits?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, finally, are we going to see these figures repeated because that wholesale cost is coming right down, so therefore that cash being generated globally perhaps is not going to be there for this next quarter or the next 6 months or so?
Look, don't get me wrong. I do think there was a case in the early months after the war when oil and gas prices spiked on the war, there should have been some kind of extra profits levy.
OK.
It will now fall off those profits, which makes it really strange. Why has the Treasury extended this tax regime to till 2028?
Shall I take you golfing again? let's head back to Turnberry because we've got some new pictures coming in. We saw a certain Donald Trump arriving in South Ayrshire earlier, and there he is on, Trump Buggy 1, not Trump Force 1 this time. Or Trumpton, indeed. Cuthbert Dibble and Grubb, I seem to remember. Anyway, he's got the red cap on, Make America Great Again, and he'll be explaining why to a certain Nigel Farage here on GBNews tomorrow. An exclusive, world-exclusive Farage programme speaking to the former US president, who is obviously going to be taking to the fairways fairly soon. hello, pointing the finger. So he's not actually talking as yet about that presidential race for 2024, but Nigel Farage clearly will be pressing him on that. Just to remind you, Turnberry, the course he took over in 2014, he's opened another one near Aberdeen, and he's heading out to County Clare in Ireland tomorrow to visit his other course there. So all that happening here on GB News Live, and that interview tomorrow with Farage. Stay with us here on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's just gone 2 o'clock. A very good afternoon to you. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Tuesday afternoon, King Charles meeting the Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition at Westminster Hall ahead of the Coronation arrived this hour, and it comes as Princess Royal, Princess Anne, appearing to disagree with the brothers' plans for the monarchy, saying a slimmed-down version was a bad idea. Could there be a cure for the health strikes? Unions and the government are meeting now to decide on their pay deal, but it could still leave the nurses out in the cold. And elsewhere, teachers have been walking out on this spring of discontent as it grumbles on. And GB News has secured an exclusive interview with Donald Trump. The former president has arrived at his Turnberry golf resort in South Ayrshire in Scotland. The interview with Nigel Farage to be aired tomorrow here at 7 o'clock. And as he steps down from his key position at Google, the godfather of artificial intelligence warns that the technology may be just too clever for us all in the long run. Should we shut up shop on the chatbots? First, though, the latest headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you, and good afternoon from the GB newsroom at 2:01. A nurse accused of murdering 7 babies and attempting to kill 10 others has given emotional testimony during her first time in the witness box. 33-year-old Lucy Letby is on trial at Manchester Crown Court for the offences alleged to have taken place between June 2015 and June 2016. Well, our North West reporter Sophie Reaper has been in court.
Today, former nurse Lucy Letby has given evidence for the very first time in this trial. A jury here at Manchester Crown Court heard the former nurse questioned about her life leading up to becoming a nurse and then the accusations that came in September of 2016. She told the court that her job was her life and that she'd always wanted to work with children. She said, "I'm there to help and to care, not to harm."
Former US President Donald Trump is in Turnberry in Scotland, visiting one of his golf resorts. On Monday, he opened a new course named after his late mother at Menny Estate near Aberdeen. His trip coincides with a visit to the UK last week by one of his likely rivals for the 2024 Republican nomination, Ron DeSantis. Well, tomorrow night, Nigel Farage will have an exclusive interview with Donald Trump on his show at 7 o'clock here on GB News. Unions and NHS employers are meeting today in the hope to resolve the long-running pay dispute between health workers and the government. Members of the Royal College of Nursing and Unite have rejected the government's offer of a 5% pay rise for this year and a cash sum for last year. But other unions, including Unison, the GMB and those representing midwives and physiotherapists, have voted in favour. Food inflation went up to another record high in April, but lower prices are on the horizon, according to the British Retail Consortium. Grocery prices rose by 15.7% last month, the biggest annual increase on record going back almost 2 decades. The figures also show, however, that prices for non-food items slowed because of spring discounts on clothing and furniture. House prices, meanwhile, showed signs of stabilising last month, according to mortgage lender Nationwide. The price of a home rose by 0.5% after falling for the past 7 months. Compared to April last year, the average house price was down 2.7%. Teachers across England are striking today in an ongoing pay dispute, with hundreds marching outside the Department of Education. In April, members of the National Education Union overwhelmingly rejected a pay offer. The NEU, along with 3 other teaching unions, has rejected an offer which included a £1,000 one-off payment and a 4.3% pay rise for most staff in September. Today's walkout is the 5th undertaken by educators this year, causing major disruptions. Labour MP for Leeds East, Richard Bergen, says striking is a last resort.
We're seeing is people fighting back because they've got no choice. And there are ways to fund this. For example, just equalising capital gains tax with income tax, which used to be the case even for a period under Thatcher's government in the 80s, would raise more than enough money to give every single public sector worker in this country an inflation-matching pay rise. So the money is there. The government doesn't seem to have the right priorities because the government should be putting our public services and working people across this country first, and I'm afraid they're not.
Oil giant BP is reporting stronger than expected profits in the first 3 months of 2023, reaching close to £4 billion. The result was a reduction from the £4.9 billion that BP made in the same quarter last year, but well ahead of the £3.4 billion that analysts had expected it to make. An update on the review into the departure of former senior civil servant Sue Gray to join the Labour Party is to be presented to MPs. A statement will be issued by the Cabinet Office, which will shed light on how Miss Gray came to switch from her high-ranking Whitehall position to take a job as the Labour leader's Chief of Staff. Miss Gray, who led a government investigation into allegations of parties being held in Downing Street during the coronavirus lockdown, could be found to have broken the Civil Service Code when she entered talks with the Labour Party. Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds has praised Sue Gray as one of the best people in government.
He wasn't the original person investigating these Partygate scandal allegations. It was somebody else. He unfortunately had to resign because he'd been at the parties he was supposed to be investigating. So look, we're trying to pick the best people to help us build a team for government. We'll follow the official process, whatever it might be, to get those people.
Princess Anne says she believes King Charles will not be changed by his new role as monarch. Talking with the Canadian broadcaster CBC ahead of the coronation, Princess Anne said the King, like the rest of the family, is committed to public service. But the Princess Royal argued that slimming down the royal family doesn't sound like a good idea in response to reports the King may reduce the number of working members of the family.
Well, you know what you're getting because he's been practising for a bit. And I don't think he'll change. He is committed to his own level of service, and that will remain true.
Well, councils in England have approved more than 3,000 road closures for street parties during the coronation. The most popular day for the celebration is Sunday, when 62% of festivities will take place. And the street parties will cover a total of 263 miles. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Tamsin, thank you. Welcome back to GB News Live. And let's update you on the breaking news where the health unions representing the majority of NHS workers, that's 14 unions, have recommended that the revised pay offer made by the government should be implemented. That's just coming through from a joint statement from what's called the NHS Staff Council. Those members of, in particular, Unison and the GMB have voted to accept this 5% deal for the current year and then a one-off payment for last year of £1,655 for all staff on what's called the Agenda for Change contract, including more than 1 million health workers. Let's get more now with our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who is joining us in the studio. The key being, however, Darren, it still leaves the BMA, the doctors out. It still leaves the RCN, the nurses out to ballot for perhaps more industrial action, and members of the Unite union representing ambulance workers in particular. It's still not a done deal across the board.
It's not, but the government will still be pretty happy, and we're expecting to hear from Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, in the next couple of minutes or so. We'll be happy that they've managed to get this deal done. You know, this body that have effectively signed it today, after lots of their members backed it, represents 1 million NHS workers. And as you say, it is a one-off payment for last year.
Yeah.
And a 5% pay rise going forward. Now, that clearly is still below the rate of inflation. Many people not happy about that, not least of all, as you say, many nurses who are, again, going to be balloted to go out on strike potentially as early as June.
Mm-hmm.
Their mandate for the current strike action ended yesterday. What's interesting, though, about this, I think, mostly, Mark, is the sense that the government are going to impose this pay settlement on the nurses and on the ambulance workers. Now, the doctors are a different category of fish. Yep. The BMA are involved in separate negotiations. But the government are going to put this deal and say, you know what, here you are, here's your money.
Yeah.
You kind of take it, or you take the risk of further strike action that actually might not go on with the support they hope.
Even those RCN members preparing to ballot, they'll have this coming through in their pay packet, whether they want that particular figure or not.
Precisely.
It'll be there ahead of the ballot.
Precisely, and I think that's what the government's trying to do
Yeah.
here. Effectively say to people, this is a done deal. We're not going back to this. You can strike all you want. You can get unpaid for all the days that you want to strike. You can have the impact on healthcare services that clearly no one wants. And I think that's the government strategy of trying to bring this to a close. Now, what will the reaction be? Will that be enough for many of these nurses to say, you know what, in the end...
And Unite members here who saw crossing Westminster Bridge on their way to Trafalgar Square yesterday, some of them representing ambulance workers. I mean, you know, there is still a significant rump that haven't said yes to this.
Indeed, yeah, and that's the big question. They're now going to have to ask themselves whether they are prepared to go on strike. I mean, listening to certainly the Royal College of Nurses, they are going to ballot their members again. Now, the Royal College of Nurses, let's not forget, had accepted this deal at leadership level. They had accepted this deal back in February when the government first announced it, but they put it to their members, and the members, somewhat narrowly, rejected it.
Just coming through now from Steve Barclay responding to this. I'm pleased that the NHS Staff Council has voted to accept our pay offer, demonstrating that a majority of NHS staff agree this is a fair and reasonable deal. He's gone on to say, it is now my intention to implement this for all staff on the Agenda for Change contract, and where some unions may choose to remain in dispute, we hope their members, many of whom voted to accept this offer, will recognise this as a fair outcome that carries the support of their colleagues and decide it's time to bring industrial action to an end. And then the Health Secretary saying, we will continue to engage constructively with unions on workforce changes to ensure the NHS is the best place to work for staff, patients and taxpayers. I just wonder, though, for those who go back to work, what the morale situation will be. And, you know, bearing in mind many of these unions saying it's not just pay, it's about working conditions and the difficulties we face day to day on the wards.
Yeah, indeed. And the GMB, actually, who have just issued a statement in response to the deal, they are a union that have accepted this. They say that the decision on the revised pay offer at today's Staff Council meeting is a welcome first step. They're saying a long journey to dealing with the fundamental issues facing the GMB's NHS members, including in ambulance services. It is abundantly clear that unless significant action is taken on key issues, the problem facing our health service and the people who work every day to save lives and keep the public safe will remain. So it's this sense, again, that the unions, even those that have accepted it, this is very much...
So that's the GMB that's just coming through. Right, well, Unison have also just been talking. Just update you on this. Sarah Gorton, who has been chairing the union group, indeed, on this NHS Staff Council going through these talks. She's just been speaking as well. Now, she's reflected, saying proper pay talks last autumn could have stopped health workers missing out on money they could ill afford to lose. The NHS and patients would have also been spared months of disruption. This pay deal, she said, must be the start of something new in the NHS. There cannot be a repeat of the past few months. Everyone who cares about the NHS deserves better. That means improving the process that sets health worker wages. So clearly, you know, this is going back to Steve Barclay saying, all right, you've got this settled at the moment, but, you know, we must not go down this road again.
Yeah, and it is that sense that effectively this is a good first step, but it is far from the end. We're just getting details through from the government as well about effectively how this is going to work out, if you like, saying that staff are going to receive their pay, this one-off payment this summer. Now, we know that the expectation is that the RNC are going to ballot in the months ahead. So it is, as you say, perfectly possible that nurses may well be receiving this payment in their bank accounts just as they're being asked.
So their June pay deal coming through, or their pay packet rather, in June, which is, as you say, is when they're going to ballot. Yeah. This is quite some may say cynical, some may say clever.
Well, you know, it's the government effectively trying to, from their point of view, argue that this is the deal. You take it or you leave it, effectively. And the government also saying that, you know, someone in a band 6 entry point, such as a physiotherapist, a paramedic or a midwife, will receive an extra £5,100 in payments across last year and this year, with over £2,000 in bonus payments arriving as a lump sum in their paychecks before the summer. So the government keen to say people will be a lot better off under this. Yes, it's not going to equate with where inflation is, but inflation, they would say, will start to come down. The expectation is it could be down to 2% by the end of this year. But what we've seen is a divide. We've seen a genuine split in unions. But I come back to this point. Let's not forget the RNC leadership accepted this deal in February.
And recommended to the
members. To their members, and their members rejected it. Now, it was pretty close in the end, but they rejected it. So it'll be a big question, though, because, of course, to hold another strike, you need a certain level of support. You need a certain turnout.
And just explain to us that this next vote they would take on the ballot would be done on a national level rather than a regional level. Is that right? So, yeah,
up until now it's been generally viewed that it's easier to secure strike action when you do it on the different NHS trust areas rather than a national ballot. Now, they're going to go for a national ballot this year, which, in terms of the actual overall majority, might make things a bit more tricky and difficult for them. So it's going to be fascinating to say this out, but we've seen a split with the unions today. In the end, the government will be pleased that they feel that they will have isolated maybe the Royal College of Nurses. There are still concerns, though. The nurses, in particular, we know have got high levels of public support. But very much the deal, or the message, from the government today is, here's your deal. It's going to be in your pay package by the summer. You've got a choice, either accept it or not. They will argue they're not going to go back to revise this.
OK, that's just coming through. Darren, thank you for that. And, of course, we'll continue to update people with the reaction from those unions and, indeed, the government with Steve Barclay. But let's now look at former US President Donald Trump, who's arrived at his golf club at Turnberry in South Ayrshire in this past hour on a tour of golf resorts, it seems, in the UK and Ireland. He's heading out to County Clare to another one of his resort golf courses tomorrow. Well, Mr President, as he still is, wants to return to the White House, of course, despite being the first ever president to face criminal charges. Well, let's just update you that you can find out more about his thinking with a world-exclusive interview with Nigel Farage tomorrow night here on GB News. That's in Farage at 7 o'clock. But right now, let's join our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire, who's at Turnberry. And there was quite a turnout for their boss. They were lining the steps there up to the golf resort. But he does look as if he's dressed to head out on the fairways, at least.
Yeah, that's right. Certainly about 1:45, the motorcade pulled up onto the drive on the big hill that you can see behind me, and President Trump got out and made the other half of the journey on steps, staff lined either side. I must say it was actually quite a spectacle. We saw staff from the kitchens and their, I don't really know the technical term, but the big chef hats. But everybody else was wearing their red Make America Great Again hats. Quite the scenes here. And of course the pipe bands as well. In a probably successful bid to pull at the heartstrings of President Trump. And then less than an hour later, a slightly smaller motorcade of 4 golf buggies made it way up the hill, and President Trump came down to the clubhouse just about where I am now, and he gave a wave to the photographers and the press and also some supporters that came out to see him. And any minute now he's expected to be teeing off from the first tee here at Trump Turnberry. I did try and capture that in camera, but I wasn't quite quick enough. However, if you, like me, that you missed your chance, then yes, as you say, tomorrow night Nigel Farage is going to be interviewing President Trump in a world exclusive while President is here in Scotland. We know they're going to talk about things like the royal family, President Trump's ongoing legal battles in the United States. He's going to give an assessment of Rishi Sunak's performance so far, and also hopefully lay out some of his plans for the following 18 months as he remains currently on the ticket to be the next Republican candidate to face off in a rematch against President Biden sometime next year. So as you said, yep, that's on it tomorrow night on GB News exclusively at 7 p.m. with Farage. And I think everybody, no matter how they feel about the former president, will be desperate to tune into that to see what he has to say about his trip here and about his plans to return to the White House.
Now, I gather he wasn't quite so anxious to speak to reporters there at Turnberry. I think that one of the correspondents from the Scotsman newspaper was actually ejected from the course by the Trump staff. Is that right?
Yes, I used to work actually with said reporter, and Martin has quite a quite a history, shall we say, with the Trump organisation, but certainly spoke to him earlier. He had joined a lot of the press as the motorcade came in earlier on, and certainly, you know, when he came down to the course just to tee off from this real jewel in his Scottish golf portfolio down here in South Ayrshire, I would say he seemed in a jovial mood. He certainly, as he was making his way up the steps upon his arrival, he was shaking lots of hands, but certainly President Trump has a much better relationship with Nigel Farage. I think their relationship goes all the way back to 2014 when Nigel first met President Trump, and Nigel, I believe, joined him on quite a successful presidential campaign. So maybe he's hoping some of that Nigel Farage luck will rub off once again.
And we'll see what the golfing performance is like, of course, there at Turnberry, which I think also opened in 2014. And I certainly will update people on his score around the course as well. Tony, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for that. More to come on Mr. President, as he still is, of course. Now, let's update you, of course, on this breaking news that we've had from the NHS Staff Council that 12 of the 14 health unions have agreed on the government's pay deal of 5% for this this year and a one-off payment for last year, £1,655. That revised pay offer has been recommended certainly by the two big unions, Unison and the GMB. In the past few minutes, Sarah Gorton, the head of health at Unison, saying that she hopes to have the increased pay in nurses' pay packets in June, saying that the majority had agreed to implement the pay offer as soon as possible. Sarah Gorton going on to say that today wasn't about sharing feelings amongst unions, as the RCN and Unite had yet to accept that offer, but now saying a clear majority amongst unions to accept the offer. More reaction to come on that as we get it. Also, the latest on the Coronation will be live at Buckingham Palace with David Starkey. That's coming up shortly.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun. I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, as we speak, King Charles and the Queen Consort are meeting the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in Westminster Hall, along with parliamentarians, all part of the build-up, of course, to the coronation. Whereas this morning we heard from the Princess Royal. Now, Princess Anne appears to disagree with her brother about a slimmed-down monarchy. The Princess Royal giving an interview to Canadian broadcasters saying the idea originally mooted when there were a few more people around, as she said.
Oh, I think the slim down was said in a day when there were a few more people around to make that seem like a justifiable comment.
The world changes a bit.
It changes a bit. I mean, it doesn't sound like a good idea from where I'm standing, I have to say.
I'm sure it does
I'm not
not.
quite sure what else, we can do.
Well, those comments from Princess Anne coming as the latest poll shows support for King Charles rising sharply, 62% believing he will be good for the monarchy, while last year, of course, only 39% believed that he would be a good king. Let's now speak once more to our royal historian, David Starkey, joining us there outside Buckingham Palace. And, David, as we speak, the King, of course, meeting those parliamentarians and political leaders. And then we're getting details of what is a really packed schedule leading up to the coronation, meeting these world leaders and, in particular, heads of the Commonwealth. He clearly wants to touch base with all the political leaders ahead of the big event on Saturday.
Yes, I think that's right. And the thing that I suppose everybody in Britain is a little bit puzzled about is that the Commonwealth sort of equals Britain. And fundamentally, of course, he is King of the United Kingdom of Great Britain. And occasionally, gently, I think he needs a little reminder of that fact.
Quite as much of a fan as his late mother, perhaps, in terms of the Commonwealth, you think?
Yes, I mean, clearly, the Commonwealth is important. It's very important to Britain's soft power abroad. But fundamentally, the figure that he should be looking at is that 62% of the people in Britain who are, in a sense, speaking strongly in favour of the monarchy. But one needs to remember, Mark, and I think this is very important, that popular opinion is a volatile thing. It can change. You saw the extraordinary shift in the figure for Charles from 30-odd% to 62. That's just short of doubling in the course of a year, but I'm afraid what goes up can come down, which is why I think Princess Anne, I think undoubtedly, now that her mother is dead, the wisest, the shrewdest head in the royal family. It would be really worth, I think, the brother and sister going away and having a quiet conversation, unless perhaps that she thought the way actually to get to the royal ear is to say something resounding in New Brunswick in Canada. Hence the role of the Commonwealth.
Indeed. Now, obviously, in terms of you talking about those poll figures, they were going up and down with his various travails when he was Prince of Wales and his direct comments and involvement with all sorts of issues. But it's interesting to look at what Sir Lindsay Hoyle has been saying with this meeting going on as we speak in Westminster Hall, saying that Charles's reign will bring a new relationship between Parliament and the monarchy as he approaches the role with his own distinct style. And we think this will be a more political king, even though it's political with a small p.
Well, the bizarre thing about what the Speaker is saying, of course, follows in the wake, Mark, of a very extraordinary signal. This is the first coronation since the late 17th century at which every member of Parliament, that's to say, every member of the Lords and every member of the House of Commons, has not been present. Representation has been reduced to a handful, a few scores of each house, which is why, put on at the last minute, there is this meeting in Westminster Hall. And I wonder whether those advising the King have thought, should he quite step on toes like that? Remember, Parliament is sovereign. The King is part of Parliament, but of course he is the part of Parliament that has to do what he's told. In other words, if both houses vote for something, the King has to sign it, including, it's memorably said, his own death warrant. But the more important question will be the sovereign grant, the thing that pays for this monarchy, that the King is eager to extend, is eager to have a very broad role in society. Parliament determines the level of that grant. Unless parliamentarians are happy with the Crown, that grant will stay the same or it will be cut. I am very concerned about the way in which this coronation is being presented simply as a religious ceremony rather than the King making a series of fundamental promises to the nation about how the nation is governed, how that will be continuous with our remarkable history. In fact, that the King should be seeing himself, I think, not so much as a figure by the grace of God, which is how it's being presented, all these references to priestly robes, but the King he's the crowned president of a royal republic. And we must never let the people forget that. That's the fundamental thing about the British monarchy, as well, of course, as a jolly good subject to gossip about and something to talk about over the breakfast table. But it's that fundamental fact that we're a crowned republic.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Sir Lindsay Hoyle has indicated that those discussions he's had, talking about the King's Whip. But should we take some succour, therefore, that Sir Lindsay Hoyle has actually made a point that he's going to be walking to Westminster Abbey in his full ceremonial dress? That this is the parliamentary figure on show as part of this process.
Yes, and I think it's a very good thing. The Speaker's coach will be there. But remember, if you go back to every previous coronation, the Speaker hasn't just been there sort of alone representing Parliament. He has been sitting in the middle of the entire House in a place of honour. But instead, the King has decided that he wants this diverse congregation, which looks in some ways, not so much like an act of state, not like an act of great ceremony, but much more like a Buckingham Palace garden party, where, there are nice representatives from charities, people who've done good things in their locality. But that isn't the political nation. That isn't the collective representatives of us as a people. And I am concerned.
David, on that note, thank you very much indeed. But certainly the crowds are starting to gather there, of course, in the Mall behind you as we head towards that Coronation Day. For the moment, thank you very much indeed. More reaction, of course, to come to what is a very busy schedule for the King this week. Also coming up, Rage Against the Machine. But what machine? The chilling warning on the power of artificial intelligence. First, some natural intelligence. Tamsin's got the news for us.
Mark, thanks very much. Here are the headlines at 2:32. More than 1 million NHS staff in England will receive a 5% pay rise. Health unions representing the majority of NHS workers have recommended that a revised pay offer made by the government should be implemented. Members of the NHS Staff Council said that the unions agreed to the deal for staff, which includes all NHS workers apart from doctors, dentists and senior managers. The Royal College of Nursing and Unite voted against the pay deal. A nurse accused of murdering 7 babies and attempting to kill 10 others has appeared in the witness stand for the first time. 33-year-old Lucy Letby is on trial at Manchester Crown Court for the offences alleged to have taken place between June 2015 and June 2016. Our North West reporter Sophie Reaper has been in court.
Today, former nurse Lucy Letby has given evidence for the very first time in this trial. A jury here at Manchester Crown Court heard the former nurse questioned about her life leading up to becoming a nurse and then the accusations that came in September of 2016. She told the court that her job was her life and that she'd always wanted to work with children. She said, "I'm there to help and to care, not to harm."
Food inflation went up to another record high in April, but lower prices are on the horizon, according to the British Retail Consortium. Grocery prices rose by 15.7% last month, the biggest annual increase going back almost 2 decades. The figures also show that prices for non-food items slowed because of spring discounts on clothing and furniture. Former US President Donald Trump is in Turnberry in Scotland at one of his golf resorts. On Monday, he opened a new course named after his late mother at Menny Estate near Aberdeen. His trip coincides with a visit to the UK last week by one of his likely rivals for the 2024 Republican nomination, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Well, tomorrow night, in a world exclusive, Nigel Farage will interview Donald Trump from his golf estate in Turnberry. You can watch that on GB News. That's tomorrow, Wednesday at 7 o'clock. TV, online, DAB plus radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns. All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Watching.
And welcome back to GB News Live. So, bricks and mortar, safe as houses? Well, the UK's housing market has been rather volatile since that mini-budget of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. But now, an unexpected 0.5% rise in house prices last month could be an early sign that the market may be on the mend. Nationwide's chief economist saying they point to tentative signs of recovery. Let's get more on how tentative that is. Liam's here with On the Money. And this, we should stress, is just month on month. As a yearly figure, we're still down about, what, 2.7%, I think?
You have to be really clear about what you're saying here, and I'm afraid newspaper headline writers often aren't. That's why people are saying, the house price is going up or down. I can't really work it out. And, of course, there's an ambivalence anyway, because if you're a young person trying to get on the housing ladder, you hate the idea that house prices are going up because you might be saving ferociously. Rising house prices aren't always a good thing. In fact, as home ownership goes down, they're not a good thing for increasing numbers of people, especially the younger generation. Let's have a look at some of the numbers, though. In March, Mark, the average house price in the UK, according to the Nationwide, was £257,122. And that rose to £260,441, the average property in the UK in April. That's a 0.5% month-on-month increase, March to April. But as you say, that's down, that April number, 2.7% on April 2022. Just fleshing that out a little bit, that means, Mark, that prices are now 4% below their peak in August 2022. As you say, the Nationwide are pointing to tentative signs of a recovery. Mortgage approvals, though, are still down 40% on February 2022. Of course, that's before the war in Ukraine. Yeah. But there are signs of a pickup in mortgage applications. In other words, people are saying, well, the world's uncertain, but we just got to get on with life. We need to try and buy that house. We need to try and move on And so mortgage applications are up, and that's what drives the housing.
And spring, of course, is a time when this starts happening and people start walking around the estate agents and so on. But, I mean, the importance being it's one of the bellwethers of the economy. You know, what's the confidence out there? Are people, you know, encouraged to spend money and to get out and do things? I mean, there is another sign on manufacturing industry that we talk about very often, the PMI number. That's down 47.8 from 47.9 for March, which indicates that we're still in the doldrums. So what's this telling us in terms of the overall picture? I mean, are we really on the up again?
OK, so the PMI numbers, these aren't official numbers. This is the Purchasing Managers Index. It's a very authoritative survey of business leaders, in this case in the manufacturing sector. If it's below 50, that means that we're going to get a contraction in the manufacturing sector. And in fact, the PMI index has been below 50 for quite a few months now. Having said that, it's quite steady. You are getting consumer sentiment surveys that are on the up. As you say, mortgage applications are on the up. If you look at car purchases, we had
the figure the other day.
The SMMT figures, don't we? We're trying to work out where the economy is going to go, because that's what people really want to know amidst all the news about the royal family and showbiz and all the rest of it. People need to know where the economy is going to go and what that means for themselves and their families. And I still believe, even though this last inflation number, still 10.1% inflation, I still believe there's signs of a putative, tentative recovery out there. Those green shoots are out there.
But are people, whether it's manufacturing or buying a house, still going to sit on their hands until they know what the Bank of England is going to do on interest rates? And, you know, is there going to be another increase?
It's pretty much nailed on after that still double-digit inflation number in March, 10.1%. We're going to get another interest rate rise. We're going to see the Federal Reserve, the US central bank that really sets the course for interest rates around the world. They're making a decision on Wednesday. I'd bet my bottom dollar, to coin a phrase, that they will raise interest rates. The Bank of England could raise interest rates once, maybe twice again. But as I said to you before, I think the next inflation number for April, when it comes out in mid-May, will be either 9 point something or even 8 point something, because the energy price rises are starting to drop out.
But still this worry about food inflation, which Ed Davies been talking about this.
Still this worry about food inflation. The fact it's still quite high. But you're right, until interest rates are definitely coming down, until the worst of inflation is definitely over, we are kind of going to be in a bit of limbo, not knowing which way the economy is going to go. The stock markets are reflecting that. No one quite knows what's going to happen. The economy is on a knife edge, but I still think we're going to avoid recession. I still think those signs of recovery are there. The danger is, for me, that the government does things that stamps on those green shoots of recovery, like carrying on with very, very high taxation, those ongoing frozen thresholds that are dragging more and more people into higher rates of tax. But look, it's a really difficult moment for the economy. The cost of living crisis is still with us, but there are signs of hope on the horizon. And to some extent, at least, with the caveat I said earlier, a rising housing market
is one of those thumbs up.
Is to some extent good news.
Unless, as you say, you're a young family or a young couple trying to start out. Anyway, good luck to everyone out there on that. Liam, as ever, thank you for that. We'll keep you updated on all the facts and figures, of course, with On the Money. Now, let's reflect at rehearsals for the coronation, the flypast in particular, in their final stages. Weeks, indeed, have been spent preparing for that big occasion. 68 aircraft, no less, from the RAF, the Army and Navy, flying above Buckingham Palace to close the ceremony on the 6th of May. Our reporter, Will Hollis, has been up in the air.
Hearing the roar of planes in the skies above Lincolnshire is nothing new. Coronations, though, they are rare. Rehearsals ahead of King Charles's crowning have drawn the world's media to RAF Cranwell. Despite more than 30 planes and helicopters flying overhead, including Typhoon jets and the iconic Lancaster bomber, this is just a snippet of the full show. On the 6th of May, twice as many from all three armed forces will fly above Buckingham Palace to mark the historic occasion. In a front row seat here at Cranwell, retired squadron leader Terence Davey-Smith, who flew in the late Queen's coronation 70 years ago. He says back then he remembers seeing Buckingham Palace below, but was focused on not making a mistake.
You're flying low level over London, and you're conscious of the fact that you daren't have an accident. Otherwise, you're going to kill a lot of people on the ground. So everyone was really conscious of flying safely.
RAF Cranwell is home to the world's first flying academy, and King Charles spent time here training in the service. With College Hall filling in for Buckingham Palace, Air Vice Marshal Mark Fluin, who's in charge of the flypast, says there's no better place to practice.
It's entirely appropriate for His Majesty the King's coronation. I think we're well placed to deliver a 68 aircraft spectacular flypast on the 6th of May, and I think that was reflected in the practice today. 36 aircraft immaculately delivered, and I'm very proud of what the team have achieved.
Flypasts are common for royal occasions. We saw one last year for the Platinum Jubilee. And in 1953, 600 aircraft flew for Queen Elizabeth's coronation. For King Charles, it's dramatically scaled back. The importance for the pilots taking part, though, will be just as substantial. A lifetime on from his own coronation flight, Terence's advice for those flying now is to simply enjoy it. Will Hollis, GB News at RAF Cranwell.
And of course, we'll be covering all that on the big day for you here on GB News Live. Now, let's update you on the breaking news we've been bringing you today. It's to do with the 12 of the 14 health unions that have agreed the pay deal with the government in terms of the NHS disputes. It is a 5% deal for this year and a one-off payment of $1,655 for last year. The big unions, including Unison and the GMB, have agreed it. The two that haven't, of course, the RCN, which is to ballot for perhaps more action, and also Unite, which is continuing with its industrial action. Well, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, said it's a good day for both NHS staff and patients, telling reporters that they'll benefit from an extra £5,000 for a Band 6 nurse or a paramedic or a midwife, separately saying he's due to hold talks with junior doctors involved in the separate pay dispute with the government. The BMA, of course, had been saying they want a 35% pay rise. Well, this is what the Health Secretary had to say to us a few moments ago.
To today's vote, are you relieved? Is this a step in the right direction?
Well, this is a good day for NHS staff who will benefit from this pay rise, an extra over £5,000 for a Band 6 nurse or paramedic or midwife. So it's a good day for NHS staff, but it's also a good day for patients. It will allow us to move forward. Now the NHS Staff Council has ratified this deal. It's been accepted by the majority of the NHS Staff Council, and we can now move forward, focus together on the patients, and also ensure that staff get the pay rise much sooner than would have been the case under the pay review body process.
There are some unions who aren't particularly happy about this, which means strikes will probably keep going. Are you going to get back round the negotiating table, or is this the final offer?
Well, it is the final offer, and it's important that those unions recognise the collective decision. This was a decision taken by 14 health unions. They reached a majority decision. It was negotiated collectively. The RCN were at the negotiating table. Indeed, Pat Cullen recommended this deal to her own members. So it's important that everyone now respects the decision of the NHS Staff Council. It's an opportunity to now come together. There's further areas where we can work collaboratively in terms of some of the non-pay issues that we discussed during the negotiations. So I'm looking forward to working with trade union colleagues on those issues. But it's a good day for NHS staff. It's a good day for patients. An opportunity now to get that pay into staff's pay packets next month and for everyone to move forward together.
Now, this obviously doesn't include junior doctors. You're meeting with them later. They're far from happy. Do you think you'll get closer to offering them the 35% pay rise that they're looking for?
Well, I think what the deal with the Staff Council shows is the willingness of the government to enter into meaningful, constructive negotiations with trade unions. That's what we've done with the Agenda for Change staff, covering more than 1 million NHS workers. We've also listened to doctors in terms of pension changes. That was a key demand, particularly of many consultants, that we make changes to pensions, and the Chancellor did that in the budget. So we've shown that we're willing to engage constructively in meaningful conversations. That's reflected in the really positive decision today by the NHS Staff Council, and I hope we can take that into the discussions with the junior doctors who are meeting later today.
Now, you worked in number 10. Have you got confidence in Simon Case, and are you concerned about what's happened around Sue Gray's appointment, potentially as Labour's Chief of Staff?
Yes, I do have confidence in the Cabinet Secretary, and it's important that ministers
police and senior civil servants work constructively together. I'm sure that's the case in Number 10. It was when I was there.
Health Secretary.
So that's the Health Secretary Steve Barclay reacting to this deal done with 12 of the 14 health unions, the NHS Staff Council, that have accepted this deal. Matthew Taylor, Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation, the employers as such, saying that this will give NHS workers certainty about their pay, but now incumbent, he said, on the government to implement the deal as soon as possible and make sure local NHS leaders do not have to cover the increased costs from their existing budgets. Failure to do this, he said, would have an extremely negative impact on patient care at a time when there are still millions of people on waiting lists. So obviously still work to do as far as the NHS employers are concerned. Update you on more reaction to that as it comes in. But let's now reflect on the so-called godfather of artificial intelligence, who's quit his job at Google to warn against what he considered to be growing dangers from developments in the technology. Writing in the New York Times, Geoffrey Hinton saying he now regretted his work, describing some of the dangers of AI chatbots as quite scary. Also saying that the way AI was going with bad actors could soon start using it for bad things. What could they be? Let's speak now to Director of Boars Group Limited, James Boar, joining us. James, I presume he's talking about sort of governments, dictators and so on who could use this technology for state purposes.
No, anyone can use it for pretty much any malicious purpose. It's not anything new. We've seen it being used to falsify voice recordings as of about 3 years ago now, 4 years even, 2019. So these aren't new abuses of the technology.
OK, so it's not the fear that, the big players as such can harness the power of it. It's available to all and therefore becomes ubiquitous, I guess.
There's plenty of fear about big players harnessing it and using it against people as well. But it's now fairly easy for anyone to access. So if someone wanted to, for example, create a video of a presenter saying something they hadn't said, anyone can learn to do that in a few months.
That so-called deep fake technology in terms of producing videos or putting people into scenes where perhaps they haven't been, and therefore the whole issue of fake news becomes, pretty real.
Yeah, exactly that. And then on top of that, there's people using the technology that's out there now. So ChatGPT is particularly popular in order to create better phishing emails, to better impersonate people's tone and personalize mass phishing emails so that they're not just going to 10 million people and every single one identical. They get everyone just that little personal touch.
Right, so therefore the inbox is obviously going to get filled up with a lot more junk. But just going back to what Geoffrey Hinton was saying in terms of the overall danger being posed by AI, I'm sort of trying to get my head round how they could challenge the human race, because clearly we think in sometimes in a very haphazard way, lateral thinking, whereas a lot of computer technology thinks in this step-by-step lateral way.
Yeah, a lot of this is... there's quite a lot of hype and there's quite a lot of fear, which almost goes into the science fiction realms. Now, whether or not that's plausible is very much up for debate, and how far off it might be that AI would pose a threat on its own. Personally, I think it's unlikely to happen in any of our lifetimes, but it is definitely a tool that people can use for malicious purposes. Right.
OK, well, the real James Boar, thank you very much for joining us with a real message here on the Real GB News Live. At least we've got that proper intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. That's it from us for now. We're back 12 noon tomorrow. Stay with us, here on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Most of us will be dry for the next couple of days, but things are on the change as we head towards the weekend. Turning more showery. We are going to replace high pressure with low pressure and weather fronts. But for the time being, this high is in control. It's brought quite a lot of cloud across the country today, but some places have been seeing some sunshine and not much rain. We do have a few light drizzly showers over parts of northern England, pushing up into central Scotland. We could see a little bit of light rain cross through Northern Ireland during the early hours. But for most, it'll be a dry, fine evening and a dry night. With some clearer spells, we may dip down into the mid-single figures, but further west, most places staying up at 9 or 10. On to Wednesday, and overall, another dry and probably a brighter day tomorrow. A bit more sunshine, certainly for England and Wales. Quite a bit of cloud at times through Scotland. There will be some outbreaks of rain, particularly in the west, moving northwards. Mostly dry and brightening up for Northern Ireland. The breeze will pick up a little bit, but it won't be quite as cold on these North Sea coasts compared to today. Should squeak into the teens. And further south, bit of sunshine, high teens is likely once more. But the breeze will continue to strengthen.